Welcome to viewers in the UK and around the world to this special programme from BBC News. Charles III has been proclaimed king in a ceremony at St James's Palace in front of hundreds of members of the Privy Council. In a traditional ceremony that was televised for the first time, the new Lord President, the Conservative MP Penny Mordaunt, confirmed the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II before the new monarch swore an oath. This is the scene live this afternoon at Buckingham Palace, where King Charles is currently receiving dignitaries, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister Liz Truss and members of her cabinet, followed by leaders of the opposition and then the Dean of Westminster. At his proclamation ceremony held earlier at St James's Palace, King Charles paid tribute to his late mother, saying her reign had been unequalled in dedication, duration and devotion. He vowed to follow her example and seek peace, harmony and the prosperity of all the nations where he is now head of state. He also confirmed that the day of the Queen's funeral will be a bank holiday across the country. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchall has been watching today's events.
In the setting of London's original royal palace at St James's, the Accession Council, a meeting of 200 Privy Councillors, Britain's political leaders, past and present, with other notable figures, a meeting rooted in past centuries, essential to the transition to a new reign and seen for the first time through television. The King joined the Accession Council gathered in the palace's throne room to make his declaration.
It is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathise with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. My mother's reign was unequalled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
The King took a centuries-old oath to preserve the position of the Church of Scotland.
I, Charles III, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland.
Watched by the heir to the throne, Prince William, Prince of Wales, and Camilla the Queen Consort, he signed the oath Charles R. Charles Rex, King. And then a moment of pageantry. From a balcony, the proclamation of the new King's reign.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
The King's Guard gave 3 cheers.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
Following centuries-old tradition, the proclamation was also issued in the City of London. It will be repeated in Britain's other national capitals tomorrow.
Hooray! Hip, hip!
Affirming and proclaiming the reign of Charles III to all corners of his kingdom. Nicholas Witchall, BBC News.
So I told you about some of the important meetings that are going on currently at Buckingham Palace. They are discussing and deciding some key timings and movements that we will get over the course of the next few hours, and we will bring those to you as and when we get them. But here are some of the key events that we do know about over the next 10 days. So the Queen's coffin is expected to leave Balmoral tomorrow, Sunday, to be taken to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. It will be taken in a procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles's Cathedral for a service that will be attended by members of the royal family. The Queen's body will remain at St Giles for a period of lying at rest. The coffin will then be flown to London and be taken to Buckingham House, Buckingham Palace, and then to the Palace of Westminster. And it is there, in this ancient space, Westminster Hall, that the Queen's body will lie in state. Members of the public will have the opportunity to pay their respects. The conclusion of these events will, of course, be the state funeral, which we expect in around 10 days' time at Westminster Abbey, after which the Queen will be laid to rest at St George's Chapel, Windsor. So let's go then to Buckingham Palace. You'll see there my colleague Rebecca Jones. It's been a compelling day already, Rebecca. A lot of tradition, the British Constitution at work, the old mixed with the new.
It's been an extraordinary day already, and going to carry on like that, isn't it, for the next few days. Extraordinary morning at St James's Palace, and then the best part of 4 hours ago, the new King, King Charles III, returned here in the Sovereign's car to Buckingham Palace, where he has been inside and conducting a series of meetings. In the last half an hour or so, the Dean of Westminster walked into Buckingham Palace, and we know, of course, that the Queen's funeral will be held at Westminster Abbey. Many of the arrangements of that will already be in place, but who knows? Details to be ironed out, final discussions to be had about that. And the Archbishop of Canterbury has also been here for a meeting this morning, and then there have been political meetings with members of the Cabinet, and also leaders of the opposition parties have been here as well. And our political editor, Chris Mason, is with us. And let's just talk through, first of all, the meetings that they've had, because really for the King, the day-to-day work of kingship has been going on this afternoon, hasn't it?
It certainly has. And I think what we're seeing now playing out very visibly, very publicly on the global stage, it is light being exposed to the inner workings of the complex and, yes, sometimes quite odd, even absurd elements of the British Constitution, when people are seeing the various pictures and the fancy uniforms and all the rest of it. What we're seeing today in particular is the relationship between two elements of the British constitutional system. Monarchy here, and then, half a mile down the road, Parliament just down the way, down the other end of the Mall. And what we've been seeing in the last couple of hours is the Cabinet, including the Prime Minister, heading in to see the King for an audience with the King, and then shortly afterwards 3 of the most prominent opposition leaders. We saw Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Keir Starmer for the Labour Party, Ian Blackford, who is the Westminster leader of the Scottish National Party. And I know from speaking to those who have been in there today, they feel the weight of the occasion in just the same way that we do, in the same way that the crowds here do as well. That kind of weight of history, that sense that a moment like this and a moment like those we've been witnessing over the last couple of days has not happened for such a long time. And so many elements of the protocols that are currently being worked through, so many people have never experienced before. And there's an additional element, Rebecca, which is so striking. Because we've seen a week in which in the UK there's been a change in the head of government as well as a change in the head of state. So many of those performing so many of the most prominent roles this week are doing so whilst in the early hours of occupying the office that they hold. Of course, at a moment like this, for the new monarch, it's the early hours of their reign. That's the very nature of the process through which we're working. But because of the change of government, the Prime Minister has been in office for just a matter of days, so many members of her senior cabinet team are new to their cabinet and post, some of them new to being in the cabinet, and then finding themselves at this moment on this stage because of the events of the last 48, 72 hours.
Having said that, there are some of those politicians, and I'm thinking about Sir Ed Davey, Sir Keir Starmer and Ian Blackford, who have been in position for longer. They will have known the King as the Prince, but going in to meet him as King must be very different, mustn't it?
Entirely so, I think. And speaking to those who have done exactly that, that's precisely how they reflect on it. That yes, they have seen King Charles, but in a very, very different role. And that's where I suppose the role and the person are separate. Yes. They've seen Prince Charles in his work as the Prince of Wales, but they haven't seen him as king. And for some of them perhaps haven't encountered, certainly not in these circumstances, an audience with the monarch. So whilst at a human level there is an awareness of one another, the actual ceremony in which they are taking part still feels very fresh. So yeah, a real sense of weight. I know from speaking to those who are there that they are pinch yourself moments. Yes, you will see these people on the political stage so often involved in the knockabout and the noise of politics. And you might imagine that they are very comfortable with the public stage and very comfortable with the roles in which they're in, for those that have been in the roles for some time. But even for them, the gravity of a moment like this is not lost on them, the history and the privilege of being part of it.
Yes. I've been very struck, Chris, I don't know about you, but we've heard a lot from politicians and former Prime Ministers about their experiences of meeting the Queen. And one thing that they've said time and time again is how much they value the privacy of those conversations. They're not worried about those conversations being leaked. In other words, they're free to say exactly what they say without fear or favour. And I just wonder whether you can give us any sense, therefore, of what might be discussed in these meetings, or is it really impossible to say?
It's really, really difficult, because even the most gossipy, loose-lipped politicians that journalists like me love ringing up because they are gossipy and loose-lipped will tell you that, yes, they have an appointment with the monarch. And often these details are public knowledge anyway because they're a matter of public record. But actually what they have talked about, they are very, very reluctant to get into. Even when you read the memoirs of former Prime Ministers, yes, they'll acknowledge how much they valued the sanctity of that conversation, but they respect that sanctity and will only brush by the details very loosely, or occasionally tell a self-deprecating story that reflects on their own experience, as we saw with Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, reflecting on that moment with the Queen where she dropped the cheese on the floor. But the actual content of the conversation, they are very, very reluctant to get into, because they acknowledge that they have to respect the sanctity of that environment if they're going to expect the same from the monarch. But they hugely value having that opportunity for that discreet chat, knowing that almost any other conversation as a politician, there might be a promise of discretion, but it can't be guaranteed. And the conversation in the palace can be.
Yeah, it works both ways, exactly. Chris Mason, our political editor, so good to have you with us, thank you. And you can see here at Buckingham Palace still huge crowds here, no doubt hoping that perhaps the new king will emerge and meet and greet them in the way that he did yesterday. Who knows? If he does, though, we will let you know. For now, back to you in the studio, Christian.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. Yes, a fine day across the south of England at the moment. So lots of people, of course, focusing on the royal palaces. Many people coming out to lay their floral tributes. There were two proclamations today, official proclamations made by the new king in the Accession Council. I'll read them to you because they do appertain to each and every one of us, and that is because, of course, the day of the Queen's funeral has been declared a bank holiday. So draft 1, appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and proclamation 2, appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. So let's go to Scotland, because a short while ago the Queen's 3 younger children, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, were coming out of the palace gates to view the floral tributes that had been left at the gates by the public. James Shaw reports.
After a service at Crathy Church, members of the royal family made the short walk back to the gates of Balmoral. Queen Elizabeth's children, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, and their partners and children. They passed along the lines of people who'd come to show their support and thanked them. Prince Andrew offered to lay someone's flowers. The older and younger members of the family could be seen comforting each other. They passed slowly in front of the massed ranks of flowers and cards, pausing from time to time to read messages. Prince Andrew's daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, were visibly moved. And then a pause and a gesture which sent a powerful message of a family united in grief.
This was a striking moment. Members of the royal family being seen in public and thanking the people who've come to the gates of Balmoral for their support and their affection.
In a time of such sadness, small gestures sometimes mean a lot. James Shaw, BBC News, Balmoral.
Yes, the Queen loved Balmoral and the people of Aberdeenshire loved the Queen. Let's go there and speak to Kirsty Wark. We've had so much of the official today and the protocol, Kirsty, but that walk around this afternoon, a reminder that this is a family dealing with the grief.
Yes, and it was extremely moving because these were the children and grandchildren of, yes, a monarch, but actually somebody that they were very, very close to. And in latter years, when she was travelling much less, I imagine her grandchildren saw more of her than they thought they would. And of course, they have children of their own. So it was a real, literally, family get-together. And they went by car to Crathy Kirk. And the thing about Crathy Kirk is, it's a place they've been going to as children for Sunday service, along with local people from the surrounding area and the village of Ballater, because we are in a very rural area here, which makes it all the more remarkable that thousands upon thousands of people have been coming today. Buses, specially hired by Aberdeen Council, coming every 15 minutes, bringing people here. And young and old have come, people from all over the world have come, people from Greece have come. And it's extremely moving because they've come because they want to be close to her. And it was as if the royal family came out and thanked them for that. Thanked them for being here, in some way easing their pain because they had come to pay their respects. And there's a real quietude here. You know, I know a lot of statehood is going on elsewhere, and of course there are crowds at other locations, but there's something especially peaceful about Balmoral, and the fact that the royal family found it peaceful is something people here are respecting. So, you know, I think this will move on tomorrow. Prince Andrew said to somebody in the crowd, it is the family day today. We're all here today. Tomorrow, things move on. And indeed, they do move on. There's a sense, I think, that people want to be here while the Queen is still here. And then tomorrow, at an undisclosed time, the coffin will leave here, but it'll make a special stop, we understand, in the village of Ballater, which is 4 miles away, where the Queen and Prince Philip and the family know shopkeepers and local people by their names, by their first names, and where the Queen used to love to go to shop and have a stroll around. So it's going to make a very special stop there. And what you didn't see was that a few minutes ago they cleared people away and 2 incredibly huge, they look like furniture wagons were coming in, but whether they're, we don't know what they're for, but whether they're to carry a particular carriage or a mode of transport, I don't know, maybe just to Ballater. But we know that after Ballater, the coffin will make a very slow way to Edinburgh. And at Edinburgh, we understand first it will go to the Palace of Holyrood House, her official residence in Edinburgh, and thence it will go to St Giles Cathedral for a lying in state. And there'll be several services there. People will come to pay their respects. It will be an extraordinary sight to see lines and lines of people up and down the Royal Mile, all the way from the Palace of Holyrood House at the bottom, coming down perhaps from the castle at the top, to pay their respect to somebody who was called at the opening of the Scottish Parliament in 1999 the Queen of Scots.
It will be a truly extraordinary thing to witness. Kirsty Wark, thank you very much indeed. And the Queen's children will be playing some part in that service, of course. We do expect them to stage a vigil around the Queen's coffin, known as the Vigil of the Princes, while it lies there. So the family, of course, still a significant role to play in the events over the next couple of days. The Box of Condolence have been set up at numerous locations around the UK. I'm joined by our correspondent, Yunus Mulla, who's at Manchester Cathedral, and a book has been opened there. Do we see lines of people queuing to sign it?
The late Queen Elizabeth II visited Manchester many times during those moments of celebration, joy, but also during its darkest hour in the aftermath after that terror attack on the Manchester Arena. And over the past day or two, we've seen thousands and thousands of people come through the doors here of Manchester Cathedral to sign that book of condolence, but also to light a candle if they wish to do so. So let's have a quick chat with Julie Ann McCulloch and her family. You've travelled across from Stockport, haven't you? Why did you want to be here today?
The Queen has been a steady force in our world and in our community for so long, and for all of my life. And I wanted to come and just write a message. I wanted to tell her, even though she's never going to read it, that she was a woman of faith, a woman of integrity, that she cared about people. And she cared about them at happy times and at sad times, and she was never frightened to have a conversation with people and to share sorrow with them.
Many people here will have chosen their words carefully. For you, your background, you were telling me before, you're Northern Irish,
yeah.
And that's another reason why you wanted to be here.
Very much so. When politicians were frightened to say things, she was happy to say things. She kept politics out and she talked about people. She cared about our stories and she wanted to heal division instead of allowing division to continue.
You brought your daughter here as well. Yeah. Sophia, let me have a quick chat with you. The Queen meant a lot to you, didn't she?
Yeah, because I was a brownie and she was a brownie as well. So I feel like it's something that I want to do when I'm older.
And you wrote a message, didn't you?
Yeah.
Tell me what you wrote.
I wrote something like, I was very sad that she passed away, but she was a kind, caring woman that looked after everyone and brownies, because she's a very special woman in my heart because she's a brownie and I'm a brownie.
Sophie, you couldn't have put it better. There'd be so many people who'd be saying exactly the same thing. Let's have a quick chat to Dad Jamie as well. Jamie, you were a bit reluctant to have a chat with me originally, but actually you have written a message and you really did want to emphasise that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've heard a lot of, and there's been a lot of words said, is just steadfastness and the dignity in which she performed her role. And it was just constant in my life. That's something that we've always known. But I think for me what was important, not just her service to our country and to other nations, but the way that she spoke about her faith was a main part of how she felt that she had the strength to carry out that role. In the Queen's lifetime there were many ups and many downs, but actually the way that she carried herself and the way that she continued to treat others, as Julianne had said, through those situations. And I think that was important for me as a person of faith myself, even her Christmas messages, but I think most importantly it was the way that actually she acted that faith through her life. And I think that was obvious, not just to us, but I think to people across the world. And that's why it was really important for me to come today with our family, but into a place of worship, and to be able to kind of give thanks for that and appreciation for how that lived through her life. And she really did live out her faith through her life.
Okay, Jamie, Sophia and Julia, thanks very much for joining me today. Now, the late Queen was actually here just over 12 months ago. At that time, she was visiting politicians, as she would do, but also ordinary members of the public, and listened to their stories after during the pandemic and how that had affected them. And I just want to sort of mention one message that was written before in the Book of Condolence. That person wrote, loyal to the end.
Yunus Mulla in Manchester, thank you very much. Extraordinary to think, isn't it, that the Queen was not much older than Julia when she became first in line to the throne at the age of 10. And yes, she was a girl guide. She was a member of the Buckingham Palace Girl Guides first group, and always had a special connection to the Girl Guides. At Windsor Castle, where the Queen chose to spend most of her time in the last year, the flag, which had been at half-mast since her death, was raised again in recognition of the King's proclamation. Crowds have continued to gather outside the late Queen's residences across the country to lay flowers and to pay their respects to Her Majesty. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports now from Windsor.
Terry Stelling served in Her Majesty's name, and this morning he came to Windsor to pay thanks for her service.
Ma'am, it was an honour to serve you and the country. God bless you, your servant. I swore an allegiance to the Queen when I first joined up. While she was there, everybody had so much confidence. But now that she's gone, we don't know what Charles the King's going to be. We've got a new Prime Minister. Everything's changing all at once.
And that shift was symbolised here as the new King was officially proclaimed. Modern methods are being used to keep up with the most ancient ceremonies. Tim was keeping an eye on the Accession Council meeting.
It's a sad day and a good day for the King. So mixed emotions.
What do you think of all the the ceremony? It's a big moment in the life of the nation.
We've never known anyone other than the Queen, and nor are most people in this country. So it's a momentous time, yeah.
All sorts of people have come for all kinds of reasons, from many different places, to leave their own tribute. But as ever, it is the Queen herself who's the consistent presence, the unifying force here.
The flowers are being moved each night into the castle itself, so what's here now is just what's built up this morning. And if we turn around to look down Windsor's long walk, you can see just how many people there are arriving.
The scene is similar at Buckingham Palace. So what does the Queen mean to Shirley?
Everything. I've known her all my life. And her father before him. And it's a privilege to be here. To just be part of what everybody feels. We've lost someone very, very gracious.
Some are here in Windsor in sadness, others in gratitude. And there's a broader sense of what a big change this is in the life of the nation.
This is all just who we are as the British, isn't it? All coming together, and yeah, you just feel very united.
You feel that she's still here. That's all I can say.
This is about duty, respect, and giving thanks for the Queen we've lost and for the new King. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, let's go then to central London, to the Mall. Charlotte Gallagher is there, just a few hundred metres from Buckingham Palace. Big crowds around you as well, Charlotte.
Oh, thousands have come down here today. I was here yesterday and there are so many more people here today. They've actually had to stop people laying flowers outside Buckingham Palace and move it into nearby Green Park because there's so many people, thousands. You can probably get an idea of them behind me, but loads of people coming to pay their respects to Queen Elizabeth, but also to welcome King Charles. His Queen Consort, Camilla, she drove down a little earlier and there were huge cheers, applause, and from people in the crowd. And let's talk to some of the people that have come here today. Sienna, you're 9 years old, aren't you?
Yes, I am. So today I came down to set some flowers to the Queen. My family and me are all sad of her death, and we're excited to have a king, but we still wish she was here. We've got some flowers, and we've wrote her a note saying thank you for leading the kingdom. You shall be dearly missed, and we're very excited to see the king and his future with all of us leading the kingdom and more.
And can I ask you, what did you think when you saw the Queen with Paddington?
Oh, it was very exciting, I have to say. It was like, oh, she's with Paddington. That's very cool. Yes, it was very exciting, and it was very shocking and more. And yeah, it was a firework of it, like emotions and all of that. And it was very weird to see, like, oh, she's with Paddington.
You wouldn't, and now you know where she kept a marmalade sandwich.
I know.
Exactly. This lady, you've come down from Manchester, is that right?
Yes,
today?
we have, yeah.
You brought Barry the dog?
Barry's here as well, yeah. I don't know what to say.
And why did you want to come down?
Just to pay our respects to the amazing Queen and to see a future king, hopefully, but we've been waiting for a while now and we haven't seen him, so we'll give it a bit longer.
What about the atmosphere down here? It's really special, isn't it?
It is. It's an amazing atmosphere. I can't believe how many people are here. We couldn't even get to the gates to put any flowers down. So yes, we ended up on the mall and we're just waiting to see the king now.
Yeah. It just shows you how many people have come down. Let's talk to some other people down here.
Hello.
This gentleman here. Why did you decide to come down today?
Come to pay my respect to longest serving monarch and wish her well, what she has done in terms of prayers for her soul to rest in peace. And I come all the way from North London.
And it's strange, isn't it? Because we've all grown up with the Queen, haven't we? She's been there all our lives.
All the time.
On the TV, on the radio.
You feel part of the whole thing because we've seen her regularly everywhere on, wherever we've gone. And she's been visiting all the countries where I come from originally, Kenya. She's paid a visit there and that's where she became the Queen. She went to a place called the Treetop, went as a princess and came out as a queen. And I come from Kenya, though I live here now.
And what did you feel when you heard that Queen Elizabeth had died? I know it was obviously inevitable, but it was still a shock, wasn't it?
Big shock, big shock. I found it very shocking. And suddenly, it just couldn't believe what happened so fast. We could see the Prime Minister just visiting, and suddenly after that, we just realized, this has happened. That was a shock for me and the family.
And now a new king, King Charles, someone who we've all seen all our lives as well.
Yeah, he will do a good job. Obviously, he's been there all the time with the royal family, and I'm looking forward and pray that everything will be fine and looking forward. Great. Okay. Wish well for the Prince Charles, the future king now.
And that's really the sense here today. People very sad about Queen Elizabeth and her death, but also wanting to wish King Charles III well in this new job which he's been training for all his life. But obviously it's a very sad time for him. He's losing his mother and then taking on such a massive job. Someone said to me earlier, it's not just a difficult job, it's almost an impossible job replacing Queen Elizabeth, because as you can tell from the crowds here, people have so much affection for her.
Yes. Although there was such affection, of course, shown for the new king yesterday outside the gates as well, which he was very grateful for and he has spoken about, of course. But interesting, isn't it, to see how many people have travelled down to London to be there on the Mall, some of them with memories of the Queen with Paddington, some of them with memories that go much further back, of course. But lots of people just wanted to be there and to be part of it. We are going to go to Windsor shortly because we expect the new Walesers, the Prince and Princess of Wales, to appear and to walk about in Windsor, meet the people who are there. You can see the floral tributes. As Dan was saying, a lot of the floral tributes have been moved inside the castle. Those are the floral tributes that have just been laid today, which gives you an idea of how many people are there, how many people have been coming to pay their respects. And what I can read you is just a short statement that we've had from the new Prince of Wales in the last few minutes. He's paid tribute to the Queen, and this is what he says. "She was by my side at my happiest moments, and she was by my side during the saddest days of my life. I knew this day would come, but it will be some time before the reality of life without Granny will truly feel real." Statement from the Prince of Wales, who was at the Accession Council today, and it is worth reflecting that this is an enormous period of change for him and his family, as it is for, of course, the new King, Charles III. Well, let's speak to Phil Dampier, long-standing royal journalist and writer. Phil, you're welcome to the programme. It's been an extraordinary day, a day in which we've seen the British Constitution at work, and for many of us, a moment when we've all got to get used to talking about the new king.
Yeah, good afternoon, Christian. You took the words out of my mouth. It has been an extraordinary day, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've been writing about the royal family for 36 years. And rightly or wrongly, I suppose a lot of what I've been writing about is the ups and downs of the family members, the soap opera, if you like. But I think today it really sort of brought home what this is all about. You know, when we saw that Accession Council meeting this morning, the monarchy underpins, you know, our constitutional monarchy and our way of government. And when you saw the 6 former prime ministers and all those other people in the room, I don't like calling them the great and the good, because most of them aren't particularly great or good, but the politicians in particular. But when you saw them and the way that it was carried out, and the pageantry and the ancient traditions and the proclamation being read out from St James's Palace, which could have been any time over the last few centuries, apart from when you zoomed out and saw all the mobile phones, of course, it really was quite extraordinary. And we've also seen the human side, of course, with the family up at Balmoral today, looking at flowers, many of them in tears. Prince Andrew and his daughters, the Wessexes, and Zara and Anne, Princess Anne, of course. They all looked extremely upset, extremely moved by the messages. And as you say, we've just had this statement from the new Prince of Wales. He goes on to say in the statement that he will honour the memory of his grandmother by supporting the King in every way he can. And I think I'm not saying it's going to become a double act, but I think that's going to be very important. He is going to be supporting Charles all the way. Obviously, he's the part of the younger, glamorous couple, if you like, he and Catherine. And I think Charles and Camilla will be relying on them to do a lot of the heavy lifting, especially as obviously we don't have Harry and Meghan on the scene anymore as working royals. Yes,
of course, the new Prince of Wales is 40. He sat in today, played a very prominent part, signing the accession documents, and that is part of the learning curve for him as well, of course, something that his father didn't witness, because in 1952 he was still a very young boy. But let's just refer to this part of the statement that is just issued, because it does talk about how the younger royals have learnt from Her Majesty the Queen. So he says, I've had the benefit of the Queen's wisdom and reassurance into my 5th decade. My wife has had 20 years of her guidance and support. My 3 children have got to spend holidays with her and create memories that will last their whole lives. And so he becomes first in line to the throne, Phil, and he will have to play a more prominent role, as you say.
Yeah, he'll play a more prominent role, but he has been prepared for it. I mean, even when he was a teenager at Eton, he would wander across the Thames, across the bridge there to go and see the Queen, just the 2 of them, frequent meetings, they would have tea together. And from a very early age, she was instilling in him a sense of duty and showing him the ropes, if you like. And so he's been preparing for this a long time. I think for a while he wanted to sort of pretend it wasn't happening and put it off and enjoy a normal life, and that was perfectly understandable. But in recent years, it's obvious that you know, he's realised his destiny and he's taken it up. He's taken it to it well, and he's learned at the feet of the Queen, and he'll learn from his father. He'll learn from some of the mistakes that have been made in the past. But you know, I think all of that wisdom is coagulating into it. I think he could be a great king. But obviously we've got Charles first. I don't think it was ever on the cards they were going to skip a generation, but now he will be there to support him.
Can we talk about the business that is ongoing at the moment? Because it's a very busy afternoon at Buckingham Palace. The Archbishop of Canterbury has been there, the Dean of Windsor has been there, obviously senior members of the government as well. A lot of this has been in the planning discreetly since the 1960s, but things will change, things in the plan will have evolved. This state funeral, when it eventually comes, is going to be a global event with heads of state from all over the world. There's so much pressure on the new king at this moment to get everything right and to do it as the Queen would have expected.
Yeah, as you say, the plans have been made for decades, but they are tweaking them all the time. One big difference, I think the Queen's body, after it's been in Edinburgh for a day or two, is going to be flown back down to London as opposed to coming on the royal train, which was always the plan if she died in Scotland. I think the reason for that is that they want to have more time. I think it's maybe going to be 4 days now at Westminster Hall where her body will be lying in state and people will be able to file past. They're expecting obviously hundreds of thousands of people who might want to do that. It's going to be open 23 hours a day for people to file past, a bit like Winston Churchill's funeral, when one journalist famously wrote there were 2 rivers going through London. One was the Thames and one was the River of People. So I think they probably extended that, and they are altering it as they go along. At the moment, we think the funeral will be Monday week, but it could be moved to Tuesday, it's possible. But obviously, we're going to have VIPs flying in from all over the world. and as you say, it's going to be an extraordinary occasion.
And you would imagine, in fact, you don't have to imagine, you just know that once the coffin is lying in state in Westminster Hall, that grand hall, the oldest part of the Palace of Westminster, there are going to be lines of people, thousands and thousands of people who, over the course of 3 or 4 days, will want to be there and to pay their full respects.
Yeah, well, I mean, thousands and thousands of people went to see the Queen Mother, didn't they, when she was there lying in state? I mean, incredibly, one of the soldiers who was guarding it was James Blunt, the pop singer, while he was still in the army. He was actually standing guard over her. But it was an extraordinary sight, and people were quite willing to queue for half a day just to get in there, and I'm sure the same will happen with the Queen.
Phil Dampier, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for sparing us some time this afternoon. Thank you. I do now have the full statement from the Prince of Wales, so let me read it to you in full. So it says this: on Thursday, the world lost an extraordinary leader whose commitment to the country, the realms and the Commonwealth was absolute. So much will be said in the days ahead about the meaning of her historic reign. I, however, have lost a grandmother, and while I will grieve her loss, I also feel incredibly grateful. I have had the benefit of the Queen's wisdom and reassurance into my 5th decade. My wife has had 20 years of her guidance and support. My 3 children have got to spend holidays with her and create memories that will last their whole lives. She was by my side at my happiest moments, and she was by my side during the saddest days of my life. I knew this day would come, but it will be some time before the reality of life without Granny will truly feel real. I thank her for the kindness she showed my family and me, and I thank her on behalf of my generation for providing an example of service and dignity in public life that was from a different age, but always relevant to us all. My grandmother famously said that grief was the price we pay for love. All of the sadness we will feel in the coming weeks will be testament to the love we felt for our extraordinary Queen. I will honour her memory by supporting my father, the King, in every way I can. A moving statement from the new Prince of Wales. I'm joined by our correspondent Rianna Croxford, who is at Windsor for us, outside the castle. Such a poignant statement, that, Rianna, from the new Prince of Wales, who, like his father, is having to combine his official duties of state and enhanced duties of state, while at the same time, as he says, grieving for his granny.
Definitely, it's a reminder that this is a deeply familial moment, a moment of great loss for their family. And as I'm here outside Windsor Castle, where thousands and thousands of people have come from up and down the country to pay their respects to the late Queen and to also acknowledge and send well wishes to the new King, it's a reminder that this is, for them, still a bittersweet moment. Many people here have been walking up and down the famous Long Walk. It's a nearly 3-mile stretch that leads up to the gates of Windsor Castle, leaving flowers and cards and balloons. And of course, Windsor Castle was a special place for the Queen. It was considered her main and favourite residence in recent years, and was where she spent most of her time. And families and people of all ages and backgrounds have been drawn here, many describing it as a time of great sadness and fondness. And for many of the tens of thousands of people who live here locally, they've been feeling that particularly intimately. One woman earlier I spoke with was nearly in tears, saying she felt the loss of the Queen so intimately, having lived in such close proximity to the castle for the past 10 years. And so there's been a mixture here, and I guess it's a reminder of, while many people mourn publicly and across the country feel the loss of the Queen, still for her close family, this is a deeply personal and, in some ways, a deeply personal moment for them.
The family, the Waleses, have just moved to Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, 10 minutes walk from the castle, and it's worth just reflecting that this has been quite a big week for the family. Before we learnt of the Queen's condition, the children were all going to the same school. It was such a happy time on Wednesday, and then this, and that's going to take some getting used to.
Definitely. I mean, what a huge period of change for them, both on a deeply personal level, reflecting on the loss of their grandmother and great-grandmother, but also, as you say, this week was the first week, for instance, that Prince Louis, who's only 4, went to school for the first time, and the kids have recently relocated here with their parents, Prince George, who's 9, and Princess Charlotte, who's 7. And so it's come at a big time of change for them.
Obviously, for the people of Windsor, this is a particularly difficult time, because we know the Queen loved her home at Windsor. She was part of the community. What has it felt like there today? Because I know when you walk around the town of Windsor, and the castle is very much part of the town, you really do feel the connection.
Definitely, and the mood is sombre, it's reflective, and for many people it's still quite surreal that this has happened so quickly. Some of them have said to be experiencing such a huge moment of British history. The late Queen, to many of them, is such a long-standing and familiar and also comforting figure for many who live here. Many of them have visited and stood outside the castle many times over the years, and they've been feeling that loss particularly intimately, more so than probably other parts of the country, knowing that they have that close tie and close connection with her. But it's not just people who live here locally. I spoke to a family earlier who were originally from Mauritius, who were reflecting on the Queen as a global icon, and there was a sort of, I suppose, bittersweet moment when their 8-year-old daughter was so passionately reflecting on how much she misses the Queen, talking about what she remembered as her special wave, her love of block colours and her love of horses and corgis, which she also shared. And I think that just goes to show how much the late Queen's impact and memory has cut across generations.
Rianna, thank you very much for that. We will, of course, come back to you. We are expecting the Prince and Princess of Wales to walk about in Windsor to meet the crowds and read some of the tributes on those flowers that you see around the gate. Let me just show you the pictures at Buckingham Palace that I can see here. You'll see that the gates are open, and we think that is because the King is about to leave residence. We don't know where he's headed, but he's had a very important afternoon, as we've been telling you, meeting the Archbishop of Canterbury, also the Dean of Windsor, who will be so central, of course, to the planning of the funeral and the conducting of the funeral. Also there this afternoon, the Prime Minister and members of her cabinet, her new cabinet. Some of them, of course, not so experienced at what is going on right now. I don't think anyone is really experienced at government in dealing with the planning for a full state funeral. We've not had one since 1965, when, of course, the Queen gave a full state funeral to the late Prime Minister Winston Churchill. And also members of the opposition have been there this afternoon as well, so they are kept fully appraised of what is likely to happen in the next few days. And I must say, if you are watching us, and we are now at 10 to 5, we are expecting in the next hour some more details, some timings, some very important timings for things that will be happening. Maybe we will also get the date of the funeral. As I told you earlier, we do know that the date of the funeral will be a bank holiday, but of course we want to know when things will be happening at Balmoral. Kirsty's already given us some idea of the movements of the Queen's body and where it will go next, but also we need to know the details of when it comes back to London and when it will lie in state in Westminster Hall, and also how many days it will lie in Westminster Hall for the public, of course, to pay their full respects. I'm joined by Ian Jones, who has spent more than 3 decades working as a royal photographer. Welcome to the programme. Give me some of your memories, if you would, of following the Queen and some of the events that she attended.
Well, it's been 30 years for me as a royal photographer, following the royal family and recording every major state occasion, incoming state visits, but also over 100 countries worldwide. And many of those with Her Majesty the Queen. So there are numerous great memories. But I think the one constant that ran through all of that was the Queen's faultless performance. As she was a consummate professional. She was warm, she was quick-witted, incredibly intelligent, and greeted wherever she went by warm crowds and great affection.
The new king said today that, of course, the Queen was a stickler for the protocol and the traditions, but she was also a moderniser. And we think back to her coronation in 1953 and the encouragement of the Duke of Edinburgh to have it televised. So over the years, they became more comfortable with the full glare of the media. When they worked with you, were they aware of how important the pictures were, and was it almost a symbiotic relationship?
It was a very professional relationship as well. They very much valued the media coverage, particularly for the organisations and the charities which benefited from their affiliation. So I thought they realised how important it was for the television news and the photographers to capture those images, because whilst many of these occasions were attended, as we can see now, by tens, if not thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, there were millions across the world who weren't able to get to these events. And it was because of this relationship that they had, and it was ongoing, but it was certainly in recent years much improved, the relationship with the media and with photographers, so that everybody out there in the wider world could experience that moment and see the magic of those occasions which they attended.
And how important to a royal photographer, clearly it's almost a stupid question, is the events of the next few days, but what is it that you're looking for, and how will it, where will you be positioning yourself? How do you make your plans for a historical week like the one we're about to have?
Well, as you were alluding to earlier on in the bulletin, the plans by Buckingham Palace have been in place for many, many years. The playbook for just this event has been written and fine-tuned really over the past many, many years, and it's been revisited. So I think once they open the playbook, there is obviously a degree of flexibility in it because of circumstances, and it's the way the media will then dovetail into that. But out there on the streets, there are the television crews, but a whole raft of top professional photographers. We benefit in this country by, I think, some of the best media in the world for quality of production and photography. So they will be out there capturing those moments, obviously for turnaround, for instant news purposes, but also for longevity, for historical purposes. The archive pictures, which we've been seeing from the past 70 years, these photographs that are taken today will be seen over and over again, while during the current reign, but also ongoing reigns as well. So it's very difficult to know where to be at any one time, but the reality is there is blanket coverage over everything. Key moments, I think, obviously, will be lying in state. I was very fortunate to photograph the catafalque there with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, when she lay in state there. I'm hoping to do so again. But obviously there are always limits on number. But then obviously it's the state funeral. We haven't seen the state funeral for, as you talked about earlier, for many decades. So it's an important moment which will then be captured and seen by the world.
Royal photographer Ian Jones, a busy week ahead of you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.
Thank you very much.
Let me quickly, as we come to the top of the hour, show you the live pictures I can see of Buckingham Palace. I did mention that the gates were open. There is some speculation that the King Charles III, will be leaving the palace after a series of meetings this afternoon. You can see the crowd still 6 or 7 deep there at the railings, people from all around the world congregating on the Mall this afternoon, and similar scenes at Windsor. These are the pictures from the castle over the long walk there, looking down on the castle, the Queen's favourite home, of course. And at that venue, in the course of the next hour or so, we're expecting the new Walesers, the Prince and Princess of Wales, to come out, meet the crowds, read some of the tributes that have been laid today, and of course, as and when that happens, we will take you to that. At Balmoral this afternoon, if you have just joined us, we have seen a walkabout in Balmoral. All members of the Queen's family who are there, her children, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Duke of Wessex. They were all there with more junior members of the family, and quite emotional scenes, which does remind you that this is a family that are dealing with the grief as well as dealing with the official protocol of state, which they will be involved with, all of them, over the course of the next few days. When the Queen came to the throne in 1952, Britain's role in the world was changing rapidly. Former colonies were gaining independence as the British Empire evolved into the Commonwealth. And the 7 decades of the Queen's reign saw even greater change. In a moment, we will hear from Yogita Limaye in Delhi and Neda Tawfik in Jamaica. First, here's Ansoy, who is reporting from Kenya, the country Princess Elizabeth was visiting when she received news of her father's death and her accession at the age of 25.
The royal visitors stepped off into the hot sunshine of Nairobi.
February 1952. The then Princess Elizabeth came to Kenya to represent her ailing father. Unknown to her, it was here that she would become queen after his unexpected death.
And from her car, the princess took many feet of film with her cine camera.
It was a tour of duty, but she and her husband took time to also enjoy the colony's vast wildlife. They stayed at a secluded tree house that once stood here. One of the hunters who had accompanied her said that for the first time in the history of the world, a young girl climbed into a tree one day a princess and climbed down from the tree the next day a queen. She took the reins at a time of great change in Africa. Colonies gained independence and became republics. As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen reached out and helped bring them into the fold. She made bold moves. Here, seen dancing with a black man for the first time, Ghana's President Nkrumah. It stirred controversy in Britain, but she proved to be a leader ahead of her time. Now, King Charles will lead the Commonwealth. African nations with no historic links to the UK are choosing to join. But this is a continent that's changing fast, and preserving his mother's legacy will not be without its challenges.
A royal welcome on the first of 3 visits to India. In 1961, the Queen was in the early years of her reign.
I am indeed grateful to the citizens of Delhi.
And India was a young republic still enamored by the empire. Crowds gathered everywhere she went. As India turned 50, Queen Elizabeth sought to address some of the dark chapters of colonial history. At this public park, unarmed Indians were shot dead by British soldiers a century ago. The royal couple paid tributes but stopped short of an apology.
75 years since independence, India is trying to move away from its past, and its links with the British royal family have become less significant. It's a complicated relationship because of the nature of colonial rule. But what we've seen here today is most people looking beyond the institution that the Queen represented to the person she was. And a deep sense of respect has been reflected in the tributes. Nice to see you again. Great to see you again.
Indian Prime Minister Modi recalled his meetings with her. She personified dignity and decency in public life, he wrote. A day of mourning will be held on Sunday.
A warm welcome to Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh.
A young Queen Elizabeth in Jamaica on her first royal visit. Back in 1953, crowds were eager to catch a glimpse of the new monarch. The Queen, it said, had a deep affection for the island and would go on to visit a further 5 times. Reflecting on her life and service, officials here called her a portrait of dignity.
Jamaica is observing a period of mourning and flags are flying at half-mast. But there is a generational divide. While some older Jamaicans have shed a tear and expressed sadness, others, especially the youth, don't feel that same close connection. To them, the royal family hasn't properly atoned for Britain's historic role in slavery and colonization by way of a formal apology or reparations.
Nostalgia for the past is not a road many are interested in travelling. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge tried to emulate the Queen's 1953 visit, riding the very same Land Rover in March. It drew attention only to how much Jamaica had changed. The Prime Minister bluntly told the couple his country would move to become a republic, something 4 other islands in the Caribbean have already done. For now, though, the focus here is on paying respect to the Queen and the new monarch. On Saturday, the Jamaican Defence Forces will deliver a 21-gun salute to celebrate King Charles III.
56 countries, 2.5 billion people who are watching events here in London and will want to know the details, as do we, of what will be happening over the course of the next week. So let me bring you the detail that we can now tell you as we just head past 5 o'clock here in London. We do now have the date for the funeral. It will be on Monday the 19th at 11 a.m. Westminster Abbey. So that is Monday the 19th, 11 a.m. Westminster Abbey. It is, of course, going to be a public holiday, a bank holiday. That was affirmed in the Accession Council details this morning. Sean Coughlan is with me here in the studio. So that is the date we are heading to, but an awful lot of things have to happen between then and now.
Well, that's right, and now we've got the date confirmed. In a way, we can work out backwards from that. We learnt today that the Queen's body will be brought down from Scotland during the week. It'll begin its journey. The completion will be at Westminster Abbey with the full grandeur of a state funeral, the first for many decades. But also it will begin very simply with her own gamekeepers carrying her coffin, an oak coffin, to the hearse. And then it'll be brought to Edinburgh. And people in Edinburgh will be able to see it in St Giles's Cathedral, go to the coffin and pay their own respects. There'll be a series of church services, we know. We know that King Charles will also have to, at the same time, go on a series of visits around the United Kingdom to proclaim himself in Northern Ireland and in Wales, and also to meet political leaders in Scotland. The Queen's body will be flown back to Northolt and then will go to Buckingham Palace. It will then be taken to Westminster Hall within the Houses of Parliament, and there people will be able to see her lying in state. And that will last for 4 full days before the funeral, which we now know is on Monday the 19th.
As you say, the new king has to proclaim himself in every corner of the country. We've already had it proclaimed at Flowery Court at St James's Palace today, and also on the steps of the city, in the city as well. But the other children will have a prominent role to play as well, and particularly so in Scotland at St Giles's Cathedral.
That's right, and they'll be holding vigil, and they'll be paying their own respects to the Queen during the processes of mourning and also the processes of the movements of her coffin. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, will be staying with the coffin. She's going to travel in the cortege from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and then also come back when the coffin is flown from Edinburgh down to London. Princess Anne will accompany the coffin again there. So I think she's going to play a very close role. And I think also that we'll see members of the royal family going to various parts of this process. The King will be will be in Scotland and will also attend services there. We know there'll be a church service in St Giles, which he'll be at. So there'll be a whole series of events now, allowing the public to take part and also allowing people to pay respect, and also the family to have their own private grieving as well.
Let's have a look in closer detail at the dates and the times as we just had them from the palace. So let me start then. Of course, we've told you that the funeral will be on Monday the 19th. It will take place at Westminster Abbey, but we've also had, as Sean has just said, more detail of the key events that will happen in the next week as the funeral approaches. So the Queen's coffin is to leave Balmoral tomorrow, Sunday the 11th, at 10 a.m. It will be taken to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh by road, and it will arrive at 4 o'clock. On the afternoon of Monday the 12th, there will be, as Sean was just saying, that procession along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh to St Giles's Cathedral, and a service attended by members of the royal family. The Queen will remain at St Giles for a short period of lying at rest, and in the evening there will be a vigil held. The Queen's coffin will then be taken to Edinburgh Airport on Tuesday the 13th of September and flown to London, accompanied by the Princess Royal. And in the evening it will be brought to Buckingham Palace with its arrival witnessed by King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla. The next day, Wednesday, September the 14th, at just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the coffin will travel in procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. There, the Queen will lie in state for 4 full days of lying in state, which will end on September the 19th, the day of the Queen's funeral. The lying in state will end on September the 19th, the day that the Queen's funeral takes place at 11 o'clock in the morning. It will then, the body be taken to Windsor Castle, where the Queen will be laid to rest in St George's Chapel. So that gives people a little bit of detail, Sean, about what is to come. The interesting thing, of course, first of all, the 4 days of lying in state in Westminster Hall, the oldest part of the Palace of Westminster, and that is going to be quite something to witness.
Well, I really think it will be, and I think people will come in very large numbers. And I think we'll start to get details of how that's going to be managed, because that's going to be an issue as well, queuing, access and all those other practical things will have to come into play. And it is it's a wonderful historic setting and just full of history. And you think of all the other people who have lain in state before the Queen and all the events that have been there, and great trials that have been held there. And as you say, it's the very oldest part of the Palace of Westminster. And I think it will be an extraordinary moment. I think then also the fact that this will be a state funeral will be of interest to people, that Winston Churchill was the last person to have one. So I think we're seeing something which we haven't seen before in most of our lifetimes, I think. So I think there will be a huge amount of public interest in this.
Those of us who've organised a funeral for our parents, I am one of them. I've done it recently. It's an extraordinary, difficult thing to do, and so I'm sure all of us who've been through it will have great sympathy with the family. But this is on a much grander, much more difficult scale. You think of the heads of state that are coming, the security, the invitations that must be sent out, the protocol of where to seat them. It is an extraordinarily complex event.
Well, it's an extraordinary act of choreography, really, and it will have been very carefully planned in advance. But even with the best planning, people will be full of emotion as well. I think also, as you say, that anyone who's lost their parents will be grieving and will have a great deal of their own private thoughts. But for King Charles, he has to both mourn the loss of his mother and the not too far away death of his father as well, and at the same time represent a public face and represent public duty. And he's taking on this massive, high-profile role at the age of 73, having lost his mother. So you can imagine the pressure on him as a human being, apart from as a head of state. I think it is something that people will feel empathy for and sympathy. Because as you say, it is an extraordinary thing to plan and take part in what is a massive spectacle, while also presumably inwardly having your own thoughts about your own sense of loss.
Yeah, stay with us, Sean, because we can go to Rebecca Jones, who is at Buckingham Palace for us this afternoon. Sean's very eloquently just spelled out for us, Rebecca, what the new king will have to deal with over the course of the next week, but also the government as well. It's a very new cabinet, new prime minister. Of course, this has to be funded. There will be a state funeral budget set aside. All those sort of things have to be sorted out, and that's what they've been discussing in the palace behind you this afternoon.
Yes, they have indeed, Christian. It's been a series of meetings for the new king this afternoon. He returned here to Buckingham Palace from St James's Palace and that Accession Council at about 12:15. So he's been inside Buckingham Palace for the best part of 5 hours, conducting a series of meetings with religious leaders. The Archbishop of Canterbury has been here and the Dean of Westminster. And as you've been explaining, of course, we know that the Queen's funeral will be held at Westminster Abbey. We have a date for that now, a week on Monday at 11 a.m. A lot of the plans will already be in place, but nonetheless, presumably some other details to talk through. And then, as you say, Christian, there's been politics here today. Liz Truss has been here. She was here yesterday, of course, the new Prime Minister, and who can forget the fact that the King said that the moment that he'd heard that his mother had died was the moment that he had been dreading. She was back here today, along with members of her cabinet and also leaders of the opposition parties. Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP at Westminster, and Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. Those three opposition leaders met the King together, and still the crowds keep coming. They've been surging forward, perhaps in anticipation that after this busy afternoon, the new king might make another appearance. In the meantime, while we see if he does, I'm pleased to say that we're joined by our political editor, Chris Mason, and let's pick up on all these political meetings that there have been today. Talk us through the significance of them, Chris, because some of these politicians will never have met the King before, but of course some of them will have known him for some time as Prince Charles.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing really, exposed to a global sunlight, because there is so much interest around the world in this transference of power at the top of the British monarchy, is an examination of the British Constitution and how it works, particularly two of the key elements of it. The monarch and the royal family, and then just down the road, Parliament, Westminster and government. And we've been seeing those interactions at a human level today with these series of audiences that you mentioned. So the new Prime Minister has seen quite a bit of the King in the last couple of days. Saw him again today alongside her cabinet a couple of hours ago. We knew that that audience had finished when there was a whole fleet of cars that came out of the gate. Shortly after that, an audience for three of the most prominent opposition voices. You referred to them there, leader of the Liberal Democrats, leader of the SNP at Westminster and the leader of the opposition Labour Party. And yes, many of them have met the King in his previous guise as Prince of Wales, but none of them, of course, until today, had met him in the context of an audience with the monarch, which he now is. And I know for those who were there, just as for the crowd outside here, they feel the weight of it. They feel how freighted in history this moment is, because so few people here around the world have seen the British monarchy pass through this transference of power. And then to be a part of that, to play a role in it, courtesy of a quirk of history, that they happen to occupy their positions of leadership at a time and an event like this takes place, is something that's
some of them so recently.
Yes.
I mean, they're so new to the job, some of them, aren't they?
Yes, and I think that adds an extra quirk to this. That, of course, the very nature of this moment is all about a new monarch. Yeah. But it wouldn't necessarily have been all about new occupiers of some of the other principal roles that we're seeing playing out publicly in these audiences. So principally amongst them, a new Prime Minister in place for less than a week, and of course who took the role of Prime Minister in that audience with the Queen just a few short days ago. Of course, with the formation of a new government comes a new cabinet. Yes, a good number of those cabinet ministers were previously in other roles within the cabinet and may have been to what are known as Privy Council meetings and therefore encountered senior members of the royal family. But nonetheless, here they are on the day of the Accession Council meeting the new king. For the opposition party leaders, as we were saying, yes, they may have been in role for some time, but not actually have seen the new king in his new role. So for all of them, regardless of their views, political or otherwise, regardless of their outlook on the very institution of monarchy, they absolutely, revere the historical significance of this and their small part within it.
Also, Chris, picking up on your point about the Constitution, what struck me this morning about the pomp and the ceremony of that Accession Council, which dates back, let's face it, to Anglo-Saxon times, but that was key to the Constitution as well, wasn't it? In the sense that the message is the sovereign rules with the consent of the people.
Exactly right, exactly right. So I thought it was fascinating seeing that Accession Council, is that this is a body that predates mass communication. Yeah. And so that's why it existed, in order to sanctify the new monarch in his position, but also then, in the events that follow it in the coming days, to tell the country at large of what has happened, clearly predating the printed press, let alone the broadcast media and social media. But also, as you saw there, that division that exists in the UK system of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy between, as I was reflecting earlier on, what Sir Walter Bagehot back in the 19th century wrote about the dignified part of the UK constitution, the monarchy, and what he described as the efficient part, parliament and government, and where you have the sanctity of monarchy that sits above politics, but with the will of the people to continue, and then below that the noise of political argument that happens down the road at Westminster.
I've also been reflecting, Chris, on the number of politicians that we've heard from in the last couple of days or so, the number of prime ministers, ex-prime ministers, who've been reflecting on their audiences with the Queen and how much they valued her advice, but also how much they valued the privacy that went on around those conversations. They knew they could talk to her, and the details of those conversations wouldn't be leaked to the media. And I just wonder whether, you can't tell me what's gone on inside there today, but can we get any sense, or are people really tight-lipped about what goes on in those meetings?
People are incredibly tight-lipped on the political side because they value the fact that the monarch is equally tight-lipped on their side.
Yeah.
But what so many ex-prime ministers and ministers will say is that they'll reflect on the British Constitution, which for our audiences around the world and our audiences in the UK might seem a bit odd actually when you see it exposed to sunlight like this. It's very different from a model where you have a directly elected head of state, a presidential model. But what politicians value about it is that they can have those candid conversations, and certainly with the Queen, and as time will go on with the new King, they could, as David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, put it the other day, have this private conversation with what he described, or how he described the Queen as the UK's greatest diplomat, because there she had been on the world stage meeting world leaders, heads of state and government for decade after decade after decade. And in the same way, the new King will be able to do that in a way that has a, if not permanence, then longevity that tends to outlast any elected politician, because they can float above politics in the way that political leaders can't. And to put that into some context, I present as evidence the crowd here.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see a crowd like this with a atmosphere like this for the passing of very many politicians, because politicians by definition divide. That's the whole point. That's how democracy functions and works, and royalty and a royal family sits above that. And I think that's what you're seeing, as I say, in the reflections here for a monarch of such long duration and longevity of service.
Chris, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Chris Mason, our political editor there. So we wait to see whether we will see the new King, King Charles III, emerge from Buckingham Palace. And of course, if we do, we will bring it to you. For now, though, back to you, Christian.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. Let me show you straight away some pictures that we are getting from Windsor. You can see that two black cars have just come down the main drive down to the gates at Windsor. You can see the floral tributes just there at the forefront, and we are expecting, and there we are in fact, the new Prince and Princess of Wales, who are expected in the next few minutes to come out of the gates and meet members of the public who are gathered. Thousands of people, in fact, who've come to Windsor today. And our correspondent was making the point earlier that the flowers that have been laid at the gate have been transferred each night into the castle. So that bank of floral tributes that you will see in and around the railings, that is what has been laid just today. The other important point, I'm just seeing now, I can see him, is that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are there with the Prince and Princess of Wales. There were some questions, of course, as whether they would be here over the course of the next week. That is confirmation for you that Harry and his wife are here alongside the Prince and Princess of Wales and Meghan, hand in hand with Harry, walking through the gates as well. Let's go to Rianna, who is with the crowds there as the Wales has come through the gates to look at the flowers. Well, that is something, Rianna, because of course, over the last year, there's been speculation about the relationship between the two brothers, and all that set aside this evening as they come out to meet the public.
Yes, what a powerful symbol of unity at what has to be such a difficult time for the family. I mean, there was a huge sombre cheer as the gates opened, and thousands of people have been here all day gathering to leave their respects, pay their respects to the Queen, but also we've been expecting this visit for some time now, and there they are, as we can see, Prince William now, the Prince of Wales, and his wife Kate, who's making her first public appearance as a Princess of Wales, along with Harry and Meghan, looking at the tributes, looking at the flowers, looking at the balloons and the cards that have been left in memory of their grandmother. And of course, we're reminded of the statement that Prince William released shortly, not too long ago, describing his grandmother, the late Queen, as not just an extraordinary leader, but as his granny. Talking about how she had been with him through some of his saddest but also happiest moments of his life. And I think anyone who's lost a grandparent can imagine how that feels. And this right now, what we're seeing is a reminder that while some families can grieve behind closed doors, their family cannot, and this will no doubt have taken a lot of strength to come out here today, looking at the thousands and thousands of people and looking at these displays, knowing it's all in memory of somebody who they held so close and so dear to them.
Yes, and of course, as you say, the Prince of Wales making the point in the statement that he released in the last half an hour that he's had the benefit of the Queen's wisdom and reassurance into his 5th decade, now 40 years of age. My wife also, he said, has had 20 years of her guidance and support. And my 3 children, still very young, of course, George 9, Charlotte 7, Louis 4. They have got to spend their holidays with her and create memories of the Queen that I'm sure he says they will carry their whole lives. Just to talk about the Sussexes as well, who are there in the forefront of our picture, Rianna. We know how close, despite the difficulties they've had in the last year or so, how close Harry was to his granny, and he made that point a lot. And he flew in from Europe on Thursday to be there as quickly as he could.
Certainly, and I think we all saw those images as he arrived at the airport, just slightly behind everyone else due to logistical reasons. And I don't think anyone expected to necessarily see them here today, especially not alongside Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Yeah, there they are. Alongside the Princess of Wales, as I said, making her first public appearance since she received the title yesterday evening. But yeah, no, certainly this is going to be a difficult time for all of the family, and this is such a strong sign of unity. And of course, we saw that yesterday as well with Prince Charles as he made his first speech as king, paying love to all of his children, to both of his children, and to all of the family at large. So yes, this is definitely an unexpected scene, but one that is being warmly welcomed by all of the crowds who are, to be honest, in stunned silence to be witnessing such a public display of mourning at such a monumentous time in history.
Yeah. And you see the emotion there as Meghan just stroked the back of Harry as they were looking at some of those tributes. Let me just be quiet for a moment, because you see the banks of crowds there at the railings, but just listen to the hush, the quiet respect that there is.
Reflect that as well. Of course, some also wish the new king well. I should also point out, Frederick, that if you had any doubt about just how important, just how central monarchy is to this country, this is a pretty good indication, because this was not an announced or advertised event that you're seeing here. In fact, they had
worth saying, of course, that the town very much part of the royal family's grief, because the castle is so close to the town, and the royal family very much part of it as they walk over to greet some of the well-wishers who are there. The Prince and Princess of Wales recently moved into the Windsor area. In fact, Wednesday was a happy day as the two of them took their children to their new school. And then, of course, it changed so dramatically on Thursday with news of the Queen's condition. Such an extraordinary shot there of the crowds on either side of the drive. You can see about 7 or 8 deep. See if we can listen in.
You want to go watch it?
And Rianna, it's been quite a busy day for the Prince, of course. He was in the Accession Council today, stood behind his father. He signed the Accession Declaration. And he is taking on new duties, the duties that his father has had all his life as the new Prince of Wales, and his father will need his support in the days and months ahead.
Definitely, as you mentioned, this is a huge moment of change for them, not just in terms of loss, but with that loss comes the realities of the responsibilities that his new titles will bring, as he is the heir apparent. And of course, here they are in Windsor, where, as you mentioned earlier, they don't live too far away from. And this week, again, was a big moment of change for them with their 3 children. Prince Louis, who's just 4, who's just started school, Princess Charlotte, who's 7, and also Prince George, who's 9, all starting school this week. So it's been quite a moment for them. And sorry if I'm kind of losing my words here. In some ways, I don't want to break up with what was such a respectful, stunned moment of silence, with everybody just, in some ways, in utter disbelief at what they're seeing at such a difficult time for them.
Yes, you can see that people are very keen, of course, to meet the Prince and Princess of Wales, and one moment like this is, for many of them, the selfies, of course, and the photographs that are being taken, but all with the quiet respect that you would anticipate on an occasion like this. With me in the studio is the historian Vernon Bogdanor, Professor of Government at King's College London. He also wrote the book on the monarch and the Constitution. It's been a compelling day, hasn't it, with the protocol and also this more modern aspect of royal life?
Absolutely. It is quite significant, I think, that the new Prince and Princess of Wales are talking to people outside Windsor Castle, just as the King spoke to people yesterday outside Buckingham Palace. That didn't happen in 1952 when George VI died. It was a more remote monarchy in a much more deferential society. And I believe we're going to see a new style of monarchy which reaches out much more to the public than has been possible in the past. And I think what we've seen today and yesterday heralds that.
And he mentioned that in his address last night. He said, in her life of service, the Queen showed us an abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress.
Well, that is the dilemma for the monarchy, how to combine tradition and modernity. If you're too much stuck in the past, people think you're not relevant. If you're too modern, people think that is somehow a bit odd also. You have to combine the two very carefully. And what we've seen this morning is much more of the traditional, the Accession Council, very, some would say, archaic. I mean, who knows what the Earl Marshal does, or Garter, King of Arms, and so on. And this afternoon, with the Prince and Princess of Wales, we're seeing a more modern side of monarchy. And I believe that balance is absolutely fundamental for the future of the monarchy.
You heard in the voice of the King last night his appreciation for the affection that the public have shown for the Queen, but also there was a notable moment where he talked of his love for Harry and Meghan and the new role that the Prince and Princess of Wales are taking on. I think he'll be very conscious, won't he, about, given the history that the children have been through, he'll be very conscious about what a period of change this is for them.
It's very significant. This is a moment for reconciliation. It was clear in the King's remarks about Harry and Meghan. Reconciliation within the family. And if one can put it perhaps a bit wider, a moment for greater reconciliation in the country. It's significant, I think, that the Railway Union has called off the strike that was going to be held. The nurses have decided not to have a ballot on strike action. It's a remarkable moment when the country comes together above political conflict and above even family disputes. And the King has marked the beginning of the reign with that image of reconciliation, which I think is very valuable.
The Windsors, the Walesers have just moved into Windsor. They live now around 2 miles from the castle. Do you think there will still be the connection with Windsor? I mean, the King obviously likes. He has lived at St James's Palace. Churchill was very adamant that the Queen needed to be at Buckingham Palace, the office, as she called it. But presumably this connection with Windsor will continue, will it?
Yes, well, all that's up to members of the royal family, of course. I personally can see no reason why, if the King doesn't want to live at Buckingham Palace, if he regards Buckingham Palace just as an office, that shouldn't be the situation. It's up to them how they make their domestic arrangements, it seems to me.
For people who are just joining us, we should just tell them that this is the walkabout, the live pictures that we're bringing you from Windsor, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in the shot at the moment, also the Prince and Princess of Wales at the other side of the drive, meeting well-wishers. A scene of unity, really, the two brothers coming together this evening. We've also had important details, which we've been bringing you over the course of the last 10 minutes or so, about the funeral. We do now have a date. It is on the 19th, Monday the 19th. It will be a public holiday at Westminster Abbey at 11 o'clock in the morning. So, Vernon, let me talk to you about that. You were at the state funeral for George VI.
I wasn't at it. I remembered it.
You remember it? I beg your pardon.
I certainly wasn't at it.
Right, OK. So you remember it. Do you suspect that will be the template for what we see next Monday?
Broadly speaking, the arrangements are in accordance with precedents, but the precedents have been tweaked a bit because the Queen died in Scotland, and her coffin will be for 2 days in Edinburgh next week, and the King will come to Edinburgh and speak in Scotland, and also presumably have talks with the First Minister of Scotland, because of course in 1952 we didn't have any devolved bodies, parliaments, assemblies, senates and the like, so that is different. And the King will also go to Wales and Northern Ireland, but otherwise the arrangements are broadly similar. The lying in state first began with Edward VII in 1910, but oddly enough the first lying in state was for a commoner, the great Liberal Prime Minister Mr Gladstone in 1898, and Edward VII, who unlike his mother Queen Victoria was rather an admirer of Gladstone, he dictated the following of that tradition, which has been there for every monarch since. Though the Queen, I think, will be the first to have her funeral at Westminster Abbey since George II in 1760. That is a break with tradition. So broadly speaking, the traditions are there, but they're being tweaked a little, as they always must be.
We see the Walesers talking to the crowds at Windsor. Many of them have brought their flowers and are expressing their condolences to William and Kate there. And of course, the Queen, who we've been told has now been transferred into an oak coffin and is currently in the Balmoral ballroom. After the funeral, she will be brought up the long walk to Windsor and interred, of course, within Windsor in St George's in Windsor. Am I right, Vernon? That's
yes,
where it will be.
Yes, where monarchs are interred.
Yes, indeed so. Let's bring in Rianna, who is watching this walkabout. I'm just minded to say, as we look at this, in the statement that the Prince of Wales put out just half an hour ago, that one of his biggest assets will be his wife, of course, the Princess of Wales, who he says has had 20 years of getting used to this role.
Certainly, and today Kate is making her first public appearance as the Princess of Wales alongside her husband, Prince William, who is now the Prince of Wales. And I suppose we suspected she might come, but we weren't entirely sure, and nobody thought necessarily that we would be seeing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan today either. But they came out not too long ago in their huge black Land Rovers, and they've been paying tributes, looking at the flowers and looking at the balloons and cards that have been left by thousands and thousands of people who have come across the country here to Windsor Castle. You can just about sort of see now, they've been coming up and down the famous long walk, that nearly 3-mile stretch that leads to the gates of Windsor Castle. And as we can see, William and Kate paying their respects, greeting people in the crowds, and no doubt thanking them for coming. And this will no doubt be difficult for the two brothers. Anyone who's lost a grandparent knows how difficult that can be, but of course they cannot grieve privately behind closed doors. As with his new title comes new responsibilities he's been preparing for, no doubt. But it's another reminder of the life they lead in public.
Yes, and of course Windsor only recently been such a focal point. In April last year, for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, that period of time, of course, when the Queen cut such a lonely figure. We were still in the midst of the pandemic. Very different, of course, now. We're through that, and people can take part in the remembrance of the Queen. There can be walkabouts like this. People can shake hands with the royals. And we saw something very similar yesterday, as Vernon was just saying. Important for the new king to come out when he arrived at Buckingham Palace and meet the well-wishers. A very warm walkabout, I thought, Vernon, of we heard God Save the King and some people singing the new national anthem. And this is the important part of the next week, the nation being able to take part and fully remember the Queen and everything that she gave to the country.
Absolutely. And at the lying in state of George VI in 1952, over 1 million people passed the catafalque, and I suspect the Queen will attract more than 1 million people who wish to pay their respects. I expect there'll be queues for miles outside Westminster Hall next week when the Queen's coffin is moved there. It will be a striking display, I think, of the affection which people felt for the Queen.
As we look at the Walesers here, in constitutional terms, he has played such a prominent role for nearly 20 years, as he says in his statement today now, and helping his father, helping the Queen as she stood back from some of her royal duties. Constitutionally, does the title he's just inherited, does it make a difference?
Well, this is a very interesting point. There is no template, no job description of what the Prince of Wales could do. And the present king is, I think, the first person to have found a genuine role for the heir to the throne in matters like his charities, for example. Now, he said in his speech yesterday that he wouldn't have quite the same amount of time for his charities as he did before, and I suspect a lot of that work will devolve upon the Prince of Wales. I suspect he will undertake a great deal of that. And you and Rianna were discussing a little while ago how important his role will be, how he'll have more work, and I think that is right. He'll have a huge burden, and it's just as difficult in some ways to follow the previous Prince of Wales as it is for the King to follow the previous Queen, but I'm sure that the Prince and Princess of Wales will manage to do that. It's not a role in which there's any job description. You have to find the work for yourself and really contribute something towards, if you like, the public service monarchy.
I remember the pictures of the Queen and the young Prince of Wales when he was invested with his new title as a young man. Will we see something similar for William?
I suspect there will be an investiture, yes. It was first introduced in modern times by Lloyd George in 1911 for the Prince of Wales, who became Edward VIII, and that was to soothe Welsh susceptibilities. And then it was revived in 1969 for the present king, and it was said by rather cynical people it was done by the then government because the Welsh nationalists were gaining support and they wanted to head it off a bit. So there's a bit of politics behind it all, but I suspect we will see another investiture, yes.
He is the modern and the new, mixed with the tradition and the protocol of the royal family. How do you think he will do that job differently to his father?
I suspect he will actually model himself on his father. His father really did develop the role of being heir to the throne. It was quite new. I mean, he could have done absolutely nothing and just whiled away his time. He didn't do that. He found a role for himself. He founded these various charities. He made particular connections with people who, as it were hard up on their luck, the disfranchised, if you like, the unemployed, ex-prisoners, young people and so on. And his Prince's Trust is said to have provided jobs for over 1 million young people. And I suspect the Prince of Wales will actually copy that model, which is a very good model after all to copy.
It's worth saying as well, this is not a cursory walk around. He is deep in conversation with members of the public, and they're, 9 or 10 deep along the railings, and indeed all the way down the long walk running up to Windsor Castle. And it is extraordinary when you look at how they do this and how they've been trained to do this.
Yes, he and his wife do connect very well with people, and as you imply, he's been trained from early years. Of course, the Princess of Wales hasn't been, because she does not come from a royal or even an aristocratic family, but she has shown herself extraordinarily attuned to the role, which isn't necessarily an easy one, I think, for someone marrying into the royal family.
No, well, as the King said today, he is there solely as a servant of the people. And I think that was something that the Duke of Edinburgh said, that the monarchy does not exist in the interests of the monarchy, it exists in the interests of the people. And so I think that's what this is really part of, isn't it? Connecting with the people and being seen as a servant of the people in the same way that the Queen was, and that is why she was so respected.
This is absolutely right. In the modern world, the monarchy depends on consent. It's, in a sense, a democratic institution, in that if at any time the people decide they want an alternative system, they can get it. And they've just decided that in Barbados, for example. The Queen is no longer Queen of Barbados from a few months ago. And in Britain, if there was a demand, which of course there isn't, to have a republic, the political parties would take account of that. No doubt there'd be a referendum. But of course, we're a long way away from that. The monarchy rests on consent. And I think one of the reasons why people feel perhaps even more upset than they thought they would be at the Queen's death is the instinctive feeling that she really did care about the whole country. And I think that feeling is also there about the King, that they really care about the whole country regardless of ethnicity, religion, political views, backgrounds and so on, that they really are concerned to see that the country prospers.
Vernon, thank you. And let's go to Rianna, who is watching these scenes for us at Windsor. You know, I'm really struck just the different generations that are there, Rianna, the children sitting on the top of the railings. Like my children, they know the members of the royal family. They don't necessarily know senior politicians. And that's the point with the royal family. They are the constant. They don't change. And so over time, the different generations get to know them.
Definitely, and families and people of all ages and backgrounds have come here to Windsor today, thousands and thousands, to pay their respects to the late Queen, but also in what they described as a bittersweet moment, acknowledge and send well wishes to the new King. Now, I'm smiling because I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a family earlier who were originally from Mauritius, and I had a very passionate conversation with their 8-year-old who was describing the Queen and talking about the Queen and her love of block colours, her love of corgis, her love of horses, and I suppose that was a reminder of how her presence and how much impact she had and how that cut across generations. And of course now, here we are. A little earlier you saw Prince William and Princess Kate making their first appearance together as the Prince and Princess of Wales, alongside the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and Meghan. They have been warmly greeting crowds. They have been looking at the flowers here that have been left in memory of Queen Elizabeth II. They've been looking at the balloons and the cards, and I suppose it's a reminder when we think back to the statement that Prince William released earlier. Remember, today's visit here at Windsor Castle was unannounced, so there were thousands and thousands already here before they made this surprise visit. When he talked about his grandmother as not just an extraordinary leader, but as his granny, and that was the reminder that we had of what a deeply personal moment this is, and how, unlike other families, when you lose a loved one, you can grieve behind closed doors. You can't do that here. And so no doubt they will be touched by the amount of people here and by the balloons and the cards and the flowers that have been left for their grandmother.
Our royal correspondent Sean Coughlan has just joined me in the studio. I want to talk more about the rapprochement, because that is a really important point of what we're just seeing here, the unity, the brothers coming together amid the grief within the family.
It's a great image of a family coming together at a time of grief, isn't it? It's what you hope for when families fall out, that they come back together at these times. And I think it will be something that perhaps King Charles has spoken of how much he loves both his sons, and you'd hope that would be a sort of sign of, as you say, some sort of rapprochement, some sort of coming together. We've had word that Kensington Palace representing who is now the Prince of Wales, Prince William, had invited the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to come on that walkabout. So you could see that the olive branch is being held out.
I mean, there is difficulty, and they've clearly spoken about the difficulty on American networks. But we should remember that in April last year, for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, they came together again. So this is not a terminal split in the family. Although the difficulties are there, they will put those differences aside for important state events.
Yes, of course. And also, I suppose you have to also think that while we think of them as being in conflict, and one being resident in California, one being resident here, that also much of the residency in this argument has been played out on the front pages of newspapers. We don't really know how much goes on behind the scenes. We don't really know how much their friendship and their love for each other has continued. I think there has been a frostiness quite clearly in some of the briefings and some of the comments made. But sometimes at times of crisis, people do come together and they find common cause. And they have both lost their grandmother, that they'll be aware of the public interest in it. And sometimes you have to put those things behind you. I think people will think about that, and that sometimes you do things for other people, and possibly that will be something that'll be a message that they've been possibly told by their own family to come together. And this isn't a time for conflict. It's not a time to appear to be disunited.
Do you think a precedent has perhaps been set here, Sean? I mean, although, as the King said, they are building their new life in America, are they signalling with this walkabout here that when there are important events, Meghan as well is prepared to come back here and do her duty?
Yes, and she has faced a ferocious amount of interest publicly, and she'll be acutely aware of that. Some of it positive, much of it negative, and that will still be in the background. I think also you have to think about in terms of, we see this in some ways as being a public drama being played out, but also it's a very private issue. We don't really know, the mechanics of what happens, and I think that part of their rather strange life is the fact that so much of what is very personal and very much their own emotions is experienced in a very public way and demonstrated through all sorts of ways. And we've had this sort of strange world of podcasts and interviews rather than conversations. So perhaps this is getting back together and talking about things that matter. And I think the public will want unity. I think that they themselves don't want squabbling at the moment. I think they want a sort of more reflective mood. So I think that they are perhaps tuning into the public expectation, the public mood.
Indeed so, and he made reference to that in the statement he put out before they arrived at the castle. He said, I've had the benefit of the Queen's wisdom and reassurance into my 5th decade. My wife also, who you can see in the picture, had 20 years of her guidance and support. But this is the key part. She was by my side at my happiest moments, and she was by my side during the saddest days of my life. And obviously he is talking about the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and the role the Queen played in that.
That's right. And these are, in some ways, family tragedies and great events and traumas that we've also followed in our own lives, and we all know about them. We've seen parts of them, and it's clearly that those experiences will come back now. And I think,
but I think of the criticism there had been of the Queen at that time, and like you say, we don't really know. We know part of it, but some of it we piece together. And what he seems to be saying there in his statement is that she was an important part of what was going on behind.
Yes, I think so.
The gates that we don't see.
No, and both Prince Harry and William have spoken very warmly of the Queen. Prince Harry particularly has talked about her sense of humour, their great relationship. And I think I was looking at the photograph of when Liz Truss became Prime Minister and met the Queen last week. Seems longer, but it was only last week that the previous photograph was with Boris Johnson meeting the Queen, and very visible in the background was a photograph of Harry and Meghan, and there they were together. And you sort of think of these series of photographs being moved around, and they were clearly part of the Queen's life, and they're all her family. And if you look at the back of the pictures, they were all there, And I think some of these things are, very close to the surface, presumably in their own lives, but they're viewed through the prism of the media, which I think possibly can sometimes magnify and maybe make them different from how they really are. Perhaps we have a role in that too. Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at these pictures and I'm remembering covering the wedding, the royal wedding of Harry and Meghan, and similar scenes, of course, in very difficult and very different circumstances to what we're looking at now. But very much in the same way, the time and the effort that they put into the walkabout, the conversations they have with members of the public, some very busy team members behind gathering all the flowers as well. And you see there that Harry shaking the hands with people there at the railings. And these crowds, Sean, I mean, we've seen the pictures from the helicopter. These are 9 or 10 deep all the way down the long walk. So many people coming out.
And people are clearly coming out to demonstrate pay their respects to the loss of the Queen and wanting to show support for the family. But I think it's also a reminder that both brothers in different ways have great box office appeal. They are
much so.
People who, excite interest, and also they reach out across generations. I think there's been a very clear separation in generational attitudes towards Harry and Meghan particularly. I think also that they have been in the process of trying to invent a new sort of life. They've left the royal family in terms of being working royals, and they're beginning to find out what it means to be ex-royals, as it were, still part of a family, but not part of the sort of formal procedures and events that increasingly Prince William will have to carry out, particularly as Prince of Wales and heir to the throne. So they are both finding new ways, as many families, you find out new ways and new paths. And this might be a more optimistic one. This week began in a very sombre way, but this could be a little bit of a bright moment, perhaps.
Well, if there is animosity in some of the newspapers towards the Sussexes, you don't see any of that in this walkabout in Windsor. They're being greeted very warmly, aren't they? Lots of smiles from people there on the railings, and there you are. Lots of people want pictures with Meghan as well, who is there talking to some of the youngest members of the crowd. Do you sense then, Sean, that perhaps Harry is going to play quite a prominent role in the next week, alongside the role he'll clearly play at the funeral? But I mean, just looking ahead to Monday, for instance, the coffin will be transferred to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, and there will be, by tradition, a vigil of the princes, where members of the family will come and be part of the vigil by the coffin.
Yes, I'm not sure of the details of that, who will be there precisely, but I think he is here and is clearly part of the event and is a close member of the Queen's family. There will also be changes in terms of titles, that now that his children and Meghan's children, Archie and Lilibet, are now a prince and princess, because they're the children of the son of a monarch. So they have, in a way, without anything else, become part of the titled royal family. So they are part of these events. And I think it would be something that people might hope to see. And there's been a lot of bitterness and I think a lot of recrimination. So perhaps this will be a turning point in this long running chapter.
Judging by the crowds that we see here at Windsor, one can only think what the crowds are going to be like through the course of the week when the coffin arrives at Westminster Hall. 4 days, we're told, this afternoon, of lying in state. And one imagines the queues will be as far as the eye could see.
And there'll be people coming from all over the country, people coming from all over the world. I think that there will be very well-developed plans to handle the queues. But if you have vast numbers of people coming into London, it will be quite some spectacle and quite an issue in terms of crowd control. I think we will get, during the week, very detailed plans of timings, when people can get into Westminster Hall, if they want to pay their respects to the Queen's coffin. I think we'll also get details of how the practical things about where the queue will be, back over some of the bridges, along the South Bank perhaps, and all that stuff will be revealed as time goes along. We'll find out. But it will be a very big event, and I think it will be the sense of mourning and paying respect, but also it will be a national moment. I think there'll be an awful lot of people wanting to take part.
I'm thinking of my own mother's funeral, and the wake is an important part of it. You meet people and you talk to people about their memories and the happier times that they had. I know this is duty, but as you're walking up and down, and many of these people will have encountered the Queen and will have been in the Queen's presence or at least have seen her, some of that will help, won't it? I mean, I saw Zara outside Balmoral today and quite upset by some of the things that she read and the tributes that were paid. But part of the healing process is sharing it with other people.
No, I think very much so. You know, many of us have lost our parents, and I think the solidarity of others is a great thing. I think it's something that is very profoundly felt. And I think we all remember those, you know, letters or emails or texts from people. They might not say very much. They might just say, you know, we're thinking about you. It actually carries a lot of value and meaning, I think, to people. And I'm sure that's true for all the royal family who will be feeling this. I think what is, you know, in some ways remarkable about this is that those private moments are also having to balance against such public expectations. I think that if you said, well, if you lost a parent, the idea of then having to make a television address the same, you know, very shortly afterwards, would be a very difficult thing. And I think they both have to, they wear both of those crowns, you know, the public expectation as well as their own personal fears and emotions. And I think it's going to be a very tough few weeks, really, for them while they go through this. King Charles also has taken on an entirely new role at an advanced age himself, and I think that's something that shouldn't be underestimated. And he has to present himself. He's been proclaimed. He's now acceded to the throne at a time when he will be, presumably, as you say, wanting to have memories of his mother, thinking about all the things that with his family and all the emotions that come with that.
Lovely moment just there, someone just reaching over the barriers and hugging Meghan. We saw that actually yesterday, didn't we? People showing such affection for the new king. There was one lady who reached over and asked him if she could kiss him on the cheek, and he warmly accepted. And you do see the warmth that there is along the barrier here, and people genuinely hold these two princes in a lot of affection.
And I think also it's very true about the new king reaching out and hugging. I think maybe that's a glimpse of a new approach for monarchy. I think King Charles is a surprisingly affable, friendly, approachable figure. If you go on visits with him, he's actually a very not a standoffish figure. And I think we're seeing that with his two sons now here as well. They're willing to go and talk to people. People want to, and it's often been said that monarchy has to be seen to be believed. And I think here it is demonstrating its ability to be popular at a moment of great sadness too. So even though there are lots of smiling faces there, it's in the context of something that is quite sad.
I do wonder, and you can see Meghan deep in conversation with people here, and clearly there are some nice things being said to them. I wonder if actually this is a particularly important moment for them as well. There have been so many difficult headlines written about their relationship with the Walesers, the split, the problems with the household, and yet there seems to be, from what people are saying on the barrier, there seems to be a lot of affection for them and people having some sympathy with that.
I think so. And I think also there'll be some element of surprise as well. And you know, we weren't quite sure what would happen in terms of who would be here. That Meghan did initially go up to Balmoral, so there was a sort of conversation about that too. So I think that I think people will like to see this. I think people will find this quite heartwarming. And I think whatever the decision that lay behind this taking place, I think people will see it as being an act of good faith, and that people are behaving well and coming together, and clearly pleasing the crowds by doing so.
Indeed, so you can just see there over the shoulder of a member of staff there. There they are, the Walesers, who are now locals. I mean, the Queen was very much a local at Windsor. We know how much she loved being a resident in Windsor, and now they stay at Adelaide Cottage, which is it's not really a cottage actually, is it? It's quite a sizable royal residence for the couple and their 3 children, but it's only 10 miles from Windsor, so they'll very much be a fixture. They'll be very visible in Windsor in the years ahead.
And the home used by the Sussexes in Windsor is very close to Adelaide Cottage, so there will be a great deal of potential coming together. We also don't know how their futures will lie either, because in some ways their paths, although they're coming together at this moment and that they've come together in a sad time, they both are also on very different paths. William is now heir to the throne, and he'll be keenly aware of that. He's the apprentice to the throne, and at the same time Prince Harry is now established in California. He seems to be happy there and seems to...
Look at this shot here, though, the four of them all together waving at the crowds. I think they're actually about to depart. That's about a half-hour walkabout, and they've come a long way down the long walk to meet as many people as they could. I think Dan Johnson is on standby for us down there at Windsor at the moment. Really interesting to watch, Dan. And of course, the morning papers, the reports of this walkabout will be full of the rapprochement that we've just witnessed here between the two brothers.
Absolutely, yes. A hugely symbolic act. I think that the new Prince and Princess of Wales emerged from Windsor Castle gates here with Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Something of a surprise to people here in the crowd who were waiting. There'd been a rumour that there may be some sort of appearance from some members of the royal family. We saw extra barriers being put up and the police sort of moving into position, which gave people who've been waiting here, some of them for many hours, the idea that something was about to happen, that somebody would emerge. And there are so many people here, thousands of thousands, right the way down Windsor's long walk. It's been a really impressive turnout, and I think people were surprised, first of all, to see the new Prince and Princess of Wales, but then to see Harry and Meghan as well is what nobody here had expected. And just talking to people in the crowd in the last few minutes, there have been ripples of applause. Of course, there have been people reflecting on the loss that this family has suffered, but people really moved by what they've seen in terms of an act of unity, because we know there's been so much difficulty between the brothers over the last couple of years. And people have remarked in the crowd already on how striking it is to see them together, how pleasing it is to see them together at such a difficult time. So there was a round of applause as they emerged, and that's been repeated as they've walked down the long walk and met more and more of the people who are gathered here. They've been shaking hands, they've been taking bunch after bunch of flowers. They stopped for a moment here just by the gates to look at those flowers that were laid freshly this morning and to read some of the tributes. The flowers are actually moved each night into the castle, so those are fresh flowers that were laid just this morning. The royal family, the members stopped to read some of those before going on down the road to meet and greet people, and I think that's been really appreciated by people here, because there's been such a strange mixture of emotions that's run through this crowd today. Of course, people are sad, some have been here quietly reflecting, some are openly upset by the loss of the Queen, but there's also been a positive energy, a buzz about this place in terms of celebrating her life and her contribution. And there have been so many children here today because families have been able to come here together. We've seen generations and generations of the same family brought together in paying their respects to the Queen, and I think they've really appreciated the sight of the brothers from the royal family, Harry and William, together with their partners here in unity, thanking people for the tributes and for their respect.
Dan Johnson at Windsor, thank you very much. Well, viewers on BBC One here in the UK will leave us now for an update on the news in their regions. For viewers who are still with us, let's go back to Dan Johnson, because he's been watching the walkabout of the Waleses and the Sussexes in Windsor this afternoon. Huge crowds along the long walk running up to the castle. Dan, I'm just looking back on the statement that William issued before they walked around. Thank you for the kindness that you have shown my family and me, he said, and I thank the Queen on behalf of my generation for providing an example of service and dignity in public life that was from a different age, but always relevant to us all. And I think that's the point, Dan. What you've seen there is the new generation of the royals taking on those responsibilities, and will take them on in much greater style, I think, in the months ahead.
Yes, and that's exactly what the new king outlined in the speech that he gave last night. His hope that now, as Prince of Wales, William would take on some of his roles and responsibilities and some of that place that he has played in national life in drawing the national conversation to certain issues. So I think the popularity of William and Harry has never really been under any doubt, but certainly you can feel it here viscerally today that people were really pleased to see senior members of the royal family at what's been such a difficult time, but to see them together in such a difficult moment really has made an impression upon people here. It's not what people here were expecting at all. When the rumours rippled through the crowd a little earlier that there may be a visit, a walkabout, an appearance of some description, some people picked up that they thought it would be William and Catherine, but nobody was expecting to see Harry and Meghan and to see them all together after there's been so much difficulty. Now, what that means for the future in terms of their relationship and their roles, massive questions that we'll have to wait to see the answer to. But no doubt there is huge support here amongst this crowd for the royal family at this time, and people have been really grateful for the gesture that they have made in coming out in public at what must be such an awful time for them as individuals and as a family, but making the time to come and shake hands with a few people, to take flowers and tributes directly from people, to share a few words at what must be such a difficult time for them. That they have been able to make time for people here, I think, has been really appreciated.
Yes, indeed so. Dan Johnson, thank you very much indeed for that. William, Catherine, Meghan and Harry on their walkabout this afternoon in Windsor, and greatly appreciated, as Dan said, by the crowds that are there. Let me take you through some of the details, the new details about the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth. We've had quite a lot of things developing over the course of the last few hours. So on Monday, the 19th of September at 11 a.m. at Westminster Abbey, we will have the funeral for the Queen. But we've also had more details of the key events that will happen in the next week as the funeral approaches. So the Queen's coffin is to leave Balmoral tomorrow. It is currently, the body is in an oak coffin in the Balmoral ballroom, and it will be carried from there by 6 of the estate's gatekeepers, and it will there be transferred to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, transferred by road to arrive at 4 o'clock. On the afternoon of Monday the 12th, there will be a short procession of the coffin along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral, with the King and Queen Consort following on foot. A service will be held, attended by members of the royal family, and the Queen will remain at St Giles for a short period of lying at rest. I'm just going to take you very quickly to Buckingham Palace. We'll come back to that in a second, but you can see that the King is leaving Buckingham Palace at the moment, King Charles III. You can just see the Royal Standard on the top of his Rolls Royce above the crowds who are taking their pictures. The King's been very busy this afternoon, meeting the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Windsor, who of course will be crucial to the planning of the funeral next Monday. And you can hear the cheers of the crowds if we just bring some of that up. So there it goes, just down the mall. As I was saying, he's had a busy afternoon meeting members of the government as well. You can just see the car there, and you might just be able to see the King in the back of the car there as it makes its way down the mall past the crowds. And there we are now. There's it's a small cortege led by the outrider at the front. And we understand from the detail, Sean Coughlan is with me here, that the King over the next 2 or 3 days will go to the 4 corners of his kingdom.
Right, yes.
It's been proclaimed, of course, outside Festival Hall today, and also outside St James's Palace, but he has to go in person to the nations.
That's right, he'll be going to Wales and to Northern Ireland, meeting civic and political leaders, demonstrating that he's now head of state and engaging with their political systems. He'll also obviously be in Scotland anyway with the arrangements for the funeral and for the process of mourning that's beginning. But he'll also meet political leaders in Scotland, and it is part of this taking on the role as now head of state of the UK. He has to meet the civic powers. Later on, in a way, this process today has been about the political role he's moving into. The coronation, which will come sometime possibly next year, is almost like the spiritual anointing of him as monarch.
Oh, hang on. The car has just stopped, and the King has just got out. It looks like he's he's going to meet some of the well-wishers who are there. Indeed he is. We'll see if we can get a better shot of that. But goodness me, we've just had the walkabout at Windsor, and there was some speculation he might stop and meet the crowds this afternoon. Clearly keen to say his thank yous, to appreciate the people who've come out to pay their respects here outside Buckingham Palace. It did look a little impromptu, that, didn't it?
It did, didn't it? And also shows that he's clearly very moved by people turning out and wanting to wish him well, and it's presumably a time of high emotion for him as well. You know, the last few days, I think for everyone, it seems a bit of a roller coaster, but for him as well, he's going to be thinking all sorts of things. I think perhaps to go out inside and engage with people and hear what they have to say, and take words of comfort from strangers is quite a lovely thing. I think it's something that he clearly wants to do, and we'll hear more about it perhaps.
Our cameraman's doing a sterling job. He's having to unplug and reposition, because I don't think anybody really expected this. As he tries to change his shot, we'll keep talking, because we might see a little bit more of this walkabout. It is halfway down the mall, so there won't be many cameras there, apart from the people who are there with their selfie sticks, of course, who will get this for posterity.
But even with these sort of intensely planned events, that there is still scope for a human moment, and that impromptu things happen, and it's not all about.
There we go. We can see a bit more
pageantry and ceremony and big events. It's about human events too, and people.
Yeah. Let me quickly return. We were talking before we saw the King arrive. We were talking about the events over the course of the next week. The body, when it's transferred, and it will be flown here, so the original plans of moving it by train, if she died in Scotland, that appears to have been set aside, and she will be flown instead, I think, to Northolt, and then transferred to Westminster Hall, the oldest part. I mean, this has been around since the earliest days of the kingdom, Westminster Hall, and the other parts of the palace have been built alongside it. And it is a grand hall. At that time, it was the grandest in Europe. So it will be quite a setting as the public file past the coffin.
I think when you step inside Westminster Hall, you can feel history around you. You know, it breathes it out of the rafters. Now, I was
trying to remember who built it. It's William II, the son of William the Conqueror, in 1097. So there weren't halls like this at that time. But so this really does trace back to the earliest days of the kingdom, and it's for people who've been in there, it's quite the setting.
And interwoven with the story of the royal family and also the political system. So it's absolutely almost the heart of the country being there. And I think that, and as you say, it's the part of the Palace of Westminster that survived the Great Fire in the 19th century. And it will be, I think, a very, very moving and grand moment.
Well, you can see King Charles III's car parked on the Mall, an impromptu walk around with crowds that are alongside the barrier, the police standing guard there. You've been watching a BBC News special on the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the accession of King Charles III. It is time now for a full update of the day's events, and that news will be brought to you by Reeta.
Queen Elizabeth II lived her whole life in the public eye, yet she remained an enigmatic figure. The Queen's speeches were made sparingly. Her words were always profound and deeply revealing.
What I say to you now, I say from my heart.
Through her annual Christmas Day speeches and at just a handful of momentous occasions, we could discover what was deeply important to her.
When the Queen spoke to the nation, tonight at 9 on BBC One.
And this is BBC One. Now the news with Reeta Chakrabarti.
King Charles III is officially proclaimed as the new monarch in a ceremony at St James's Palace, televised for the first time. In a ritual stretching back centuries, the King pledged his commitment to his new role in front of a packed room.
And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
All 6 living former Prime Ministers were in the audience, which included other senior politicians, judges and officials. Outside, hundreds of people witnessed the pomp and ceremony of the proclamation up on a balcony of the palace.
Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
A surprise show of unity as the Prince and Princess of Wales are joined by Prince Harry and Meghan at Windsor Castle. And at Balmoral, the Queen's 3 younger children and their families viewed tributes to her after attending a church service. It comes as the date of the Queen's funeral is announced as Monday, September the 19th. And in other news this evening, Ukraine says it has retaken several key towns and cities in the north and east as its offensive against Russian forces gathers pace. Good evening. Charles III, who became monarch immediately after the death of his mother, has been formally proclaimed king at St James's Palace in London. In a ceremony which dates back centuries and which was televised for the first time in its history, the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was officially confirmed before the new monarch swore an oath. King Charles paid tribute to his late mother, saying her reign had been unequalled in dedication, duration and devotion. He vowed to follow her example and to seek peace, harmony and the prosperity of all the nations where he is now head of state. He also confirmed that the day of the Queen's funeral on Monday the 19th of September will be a bank holiday across the country. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchall has been watching today's events.
In the setting of London's original royal palace at St James's, the Accession Council, Britain's political leaders past and present with other notable figures, there to pledge their allegiance to Britain's new head of state.
God save the King!
God save the King!
The King joined the Accession Council gathered in the palace's throne room to make his declaration.
It is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathise with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. My mother's reign was unequalled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
The King took a centuries-old oath to preserve the position of the Church of Scotland.
I, Charles III, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland.
Watched by the heir to the throne, Prince William, Prince of Wales, and Camilla the Queen Consort, he signed the oath Charles R. Charles Rex, King. And then a moment of pageantry. From a balcony, the Garter King of Arms issued the proclamation of the new king's reign.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
The King's Guard gave 3 cheers.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
Hooray!
Hip hip!
Hooray!
Hip hip!
Hooray!
Following centuries-old tradition, the proclamation was also issued in the City of London. It will be repeated in Britain's other national capitals tomorrow.
Hooray! Hip hip!
Affirming and proclaiming the reign of Charles III to all corners of his kingdom. Nicholas Witchall, BBC News.
The new Prince and Princess of Wales and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have appeared together in a surprise show of unity this evening. They greeted well-wishers and looked at floral tributes outside Windsor Castle. Prince William also issued a statement paying tribute to the late Queen. He said, "She was by my side at my happiest moments, and she was by my side during the saddest days of my life. I knew this day would come, but it'll be some time before the reality of life without Granny will truly feel real." Our correspondent Daniella Ralph reports now on the brothers' joint visit.
Unexpected and unannounced, nobody had seen this coming. After the rancour and the conflict, the fallout and the friction, this was a family reunited in grief. The new Prince and Princess of Wales, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, together in Windsor to view the flowers and see those who had come to mourn the Queen. All eyes were on them. The brothers have barely spoken to each other for 2 years, but today something clearly shifted. Harry and Meghan walked down one side of the crowd on Windsor's long walk up to the castle, chatting, receiving flowers and condolences. On the other side were William and Catherine, doing much the same, particularly focusing on families and children who had come out to remember the Queen. It's hard to imagine quite how this moment came about. Perhaps the public outpouring of love for the Queen and the weight of responsibility their father now bears caused Harry and William to find a peace that has previously been hard to reach. It was an extraordinary moment of solidarity that seemed to please all those there to witness it. In her death, the Queen appears to have helped heal a damaging rift as the royal family comes together to say their farewell. Daniella Ralph, BBC News.
Let's join Dan Johnson, who is in Windsor for us this evening. And Dan, what was the reaction of people there to William and Harry appearing together?
Such a warm response to that show of unity from Harry and from William, being joined by their partners. I think people were surprised. We didn't know what to expect here. There were rumours going through the crowd. There were ripples of excitement. People were really pleased to see any members of the royal family and to get the chance to share their tributes, a few words, to hand over a bunch of flowers. But a real surprise for people to see the brothers together after so much division, so many difficult days. I think it really has made an impression upon people here, and it's been appreciated. There have been a real mixture of emotions here. You cannot mistake that some people are deeply sad, are really upset by the loss of the Queen. There have been people here quietly reflecting, but there's also been a positivity about this place, a mood of celebration today. There have been loads of people here as families who've brought their children here. I've seen parents trying to explain to young kids what these momentous events are actually about. I've seen grandparents sharing their own memories and trying to communicate what this means to the younger generations. So we've seen families united in marking the service that the Queen gave, and I think what has really added an extra shine here on this sunny evening has been the fact that the brothers have managed to put aside their difficulties at what is such a tough time for their family and for all the thousands of people who gathered here to pay their respects.
Thank you very much. Dan Johnson there. Well, meanwhile, all day, crowds have continued to gather outside Buckingham Palace and St James's Palace to pay their respects to the late Queen Elizabeth. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been spending the day with those who've travelled to pay tribute.
If ever there was a moment for a child to live through history, to understand kings and queens, to mark the moment one era transitioned into another, this was it. Just a few hundred from the crowds of thousands allowed outside St James's Palace to hear the new king proclaimed. The youngest, Orla Elizabeth, 11 weeks old.
It's history, isn't it? And I think by bringing her down today, it's something that we can talk to her about. She'll obviously be spoken to about the Queen because she's named after her. And then it's something that she can then pass on to her kids.
So what do you make of King Charles so far?
I think he's been absolutely incredible, really, and doing all of that, what he did yesterday, the day after his mother died, it takes guts, and I thought he was absolutely magnificent.
A real sense of trying to involve the people, his subjects, to bring them along with the change, knitted by their grandma. Lottie and Isabel had brought their queens. Why have you brought those down today, girls?
Because King Charles' mother is the Queen. We went to put flowers down for the Queen.
It's a moment of history. We wanted the girls to come and pay their respects and see the new king. It will be a changing era, but I think the public are behind Charles and King Charles, and it will support him all the way.
Not everyone had the best view, but we are all living through, experiencing this new era.
Thankfully today I'm not crying because yesterday I was crying very much. So,
what did you make of the proclamation ceremony?
I mean, it's emotional. Oh my God, Prince Charles is the king and the Queen is not there anymore.
Buckingham Palace was enveloped by people, mournful, celebratory, a swirl of changing emotions. There are vast crowds, 7, 8 people deep on both sides of the Mall. Everyone just trying to get a glimpse of the new king. The royal car slowing so that everyone here could say they'd seen King Charles.
It was worth the wait. Brilliant.
How long did you wait for?
We think we've put in about 3 hours. So,
why did you want to come now?
I just wanted to be part of this. Just so important, just to be part of the moment.
And what do you make of the new king?
I like him. I like Charlie. He's good. Yeah, I really like Charlie.
Rufus, you just saw the king.
Yeah.
How was that?
Amazing. I won't forget it. Yeah.
A pilgrimage to the palace, flowers to remember the Queen, cheers to welcome the king. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Let's hear again from Nicholas Witchall, who's with me. Nicholas, lots of emotion and tradition today, but the big surprise was at Windsor.
Yep, completely unexpected. We had thought that it would be William and Catherine, the Waleses as we must learn to call them, but according to Kensington Palace, they invited the Sussexes to join them, and as we saw, they turned up together. Now, I thought that Meghan looked rather anxious as she arrived there. There was some interaction between the couples, particularly between the brothers, but not a huge amount. They went to separate parts of the crowd, of course. But certainly this will be seen as a hopeful sign that the breach between the two branches of the family can be healed at this time of family grief. But I think we shouldn't jump to conclusions. There are very bruised feelings on both sides. Charles, of course, extended love to Harry and Meghan in his speech last night. The main event today, his attendance at the Accession Council, all televised, as we saw. I think the importance of that is that it is an important part in establishing his reign. Also an opportunity for him once again to pledge himself to constitutional government, and a good place to do it in front of all the main political figures in the land.
Nick, many thanks. Well, members of the Cabinet have had an audience with King Charles after he was formally proclaimed monarch in succession to the late Queen. Liz Truss took her senior ministers to Buckingham Palace to be received by the Sovereign for the first time. After the meetings, the King spent time with the leaders of opposition parties, including the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Well, our political editor, Chris Mason, is at Buckingham Palace for us. And Chris, this is the start of the relationship between the new sovereign and today's most senior politicians.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what we're seeing portrayed on the global stage is the British Constitution, sunlight being poured upon it, florid in decoration and steeped in history. And we're seeing the interactions between monarch, Parliament and government. So we see the new Prime Minister yet again seeing the new King alongside her cabinet today, as well as opposition leaders from the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and also the Scottish National Party at Westminster. I know from speaking to those who've been there today, they feel the history in just the same way as the crowds do here, that a quirk of history means they happen to be in those posts at the time of a change in the sovereign. What I can also tell you this evening is that the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, in office of course for just a handful of days, is going to accompany the King on a tour of the UK in the coming days, taking in Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff. A big moment for the two of them, and there is a political undertone to the Prime Minister's journey. Both the Prime Minister and the King, proud defenders of the union of the UK. And of course we know, to greater or lesser extents in different parts of the UK, there are tensions in that union. For a new Prime Minister, a Prime Minister of the UK, to accompany a new monarch on that tour will mean something for her personally, but will mean something politically too.
OK, Chris, many thanks. As we said earlier, it was announced this afternoon that the Queen's state funeral will take place on the morning of Monday, the 19th of September at Westminster Abbey. The Queen's cortege will leave Balmoral tomorrow and will head to Edinburgh. Our correspondent James Landale has the details.
Here are some of the key events coming up. Tomorrow morning at Balmoral, the Queen's gatekeepers will carry her body to a hearse, which will take the coffin on a 6-hour journey to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. The following afternoon, the oak coffin will be carried in procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles's Cathedral, with the King and other members of the royal family following on foot. There'll be a service at the cathedral attended by members of the royal family. The Queen's body will lie in rest there for 24 hours in continuous vigil, so the public have a chance to pay their respects. Then on Tuesday afternoon, the coffin, accompanied by the Princess Royal, will be flown to Northolt Airport in London and taken on to Buckingham Palace. From there, on Wednesday afternoon, the Queen's body will be conveyed on a gun carriage up the Mall. The procession will pass through Horse Guards, down Whitehall, all the way to Westminster Hall, where the Archbishop of Canterbury will conduct a short service, attended by the King and the Queen Consort. For 4 days in this ancient building, the Queen will lie in state on a raised platform known as a catafalque, and many thousands are expected to file past the coffin. Then, on Bank Holiday Monday morning, the Queen's coffin will leave Westminster Hall and be taken by gun carriage to Westminster Abbey. Members of the royal family are expected to follow the coffin as part of the short procession. And then, at 11 o'clock on Monday, there'll be a full state funeral at the Abbey, after which the Queen will be laid to rest at St George's Chapel, Windsor. Reeta.
James, thank you. And you can see full coverage of the journey of the Queen's cortege tomorrow morning on BBC One, and that is from 10 o'clock. The Queen's three youngest children, Princess Anne and Princes Andrew and Edward, along with their families, remain at Balmoral, and today, following a church service, they took time to read and admire the growing floral tributes outside the castle's gates. From there, Sarah Campbell reports.
It's not long now until the late Queen leaves this beautiful part of Scotland forever, a place which was so close to her heart. Before she starts her final journey tomorrow, people travelled here to say their own goodbyes. The Queen's family was on the minds of many of those here today, and this afternoon the castle gates opened, and in convoy, three of the Queen's children, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, Princess Anne and their families, made their way to the local church for a private service. During her lifetime, the Queen talked about the strength and comfort she found through her faith, and during the long summer months here on the Balmoral estate, she worshipped here at Crathy Kirk. In its familiar surroundings, her family came together today to pray. It was a short service, and afterwards the three families left the vehicles and walked across the bridge over the River Dee to the people who had come to pay their respects.
This is a family event, and I just feel incredibly solemn for that. They've got such a solemn time ahead of them as a family.
It's important that he's aware, because of course he'll only know really a king rather than a queen.
Yeah.
It's so sad, you know, and to see her go and it will look so different. It's just amazing. She was such an amazing woman. She did so much.
It is still just 2 days since the Queen died, and the emotion was clear as family members comforted one another, taking time to read some of the hundreds of messages left at the castle gates in tribute to their mother and grandmother. Before returning back behind castle walls, they stopped and looked back. Prince Andrew, in a rare public appearance, led a wave, which was acknowledged by the crowd. A mutual recognition of the loss the family and the nation is coming to terms with.
Well, we now know that since her death on Thursday, the Queen has lain in the ballroom here at Balmoral Castle in an oak coffin covered with the Royal Standard for Scotland and topped with a wreath of flowers. It was said, and is said, a senior palace official today, a scene of quiet dignity. Now, the time here has allowed not only members of her family, but also those loyal members of staff, many of whom had worked with the Queen for many years. It allowed them to pay their respects to the Queen. And tomorrow morning, 6 of the estate's gameskeepers will take the coffin to the waiting hearse, and the journey from this place, a place that the Queen so cherished, will begin. Reeta.
Sarah, thank you. The Queen travelled widely across the UK throughout her long reign, and it's thought that nearly a third of the country saw or even met her during her lifetime. One of the places she visited a number of times was Bolton in Lancashire, and our special correspondent Jeremy Cook has been to the town to speak to people who met and admired her.
Away from the capital and the palace and the crowds, a nation's quiet grief. Quiet, but profoundly felt.
She's beautiful. There'll never be another one like her, will there? I mean, tears just streamed down my face, and you've got to believe it, but it's difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
There's sadness here, of course, but gratitude too. So many lives touched by their Queen. Telegrams and cards that mean so much.
I got one, a special one for my diamond wedding. It's nice with that Buckingham Palace envelope. Yeah. Yeah. We treasure that, we treasure that.
Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh leave Bolton Town Hall.
Bolton, in our northern heartlands, a royal destination over several decades. In 2009, it was Warburton's Bakery. A short visit, but lifelong memories.
She made me feel exceedingly important, and that's what I remember about her. She was all about me on that day.
Would it be ridiculous of me to say that that moment, that exchange, actually changed your life?
It did, yes, because I'm still talking about it 13 years later. And, you know, I've met the Queen, and I remember when she walked away and she turned back to me and she said, "Keep up the good work." And I said to my colleague who decided, I said, "Wow."
The passing of a monarch is a loss felt in all corners of the country.
In offering our deepest condolences and sympathies in passing of our late Queen Elizabeth II.
In every one of our communities.
She was not just the Queen, she was our Queen for all communities, whichever faith you were from. In particular, I'd like to sort of pass my condolences from the community of Makkah Mosque and the community as a whole. She was our Queen, and we deeply going to miss her.
Al, the bus driver, is a proud monarchist.
Good to see you. On your break.
His patriotic outfit, a heartfelt tribute.
I think the whole world is going to miss her. Really, the whole world is going to miss. They are. What can we do? We can move on, and as I say, support our new king.
Take a moment, though.
Karen is all about helping and supporting Bolton's younger generation. She knows the inspiration that the Queen has given, especially on her visits to this town.
It makes the community feel like they matter. As individuals, as a community, as a town, that, you know, we're not just a place forgotten up in the north when the Queen comes to see us, so really, really important.
Last word to Tilly, a personal tribute across the generations.
Thank you for looking after the country and caring. Hope that you rest in peace.
Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Bolton.
Now, in other news, after months of deadlock, Ukraine's counter-offensive against Russia is gathering momentum, with more territory recaptured in the south and the east of the country. Ukrainian troops are now said to have entered Kupiansk, a railway city that's acted as a key logistics centre for Russian forces in the northeast since February. In some areas, the Russian retreat is said to have been a rout. And there are reports that the Russians have pulled out from around Izium. Moscow says to regroup elsewhere. From central Ukraine, our senior international correspondent Orla Guerin reports.
Ukraine's rapid counter-offensive is gaining ground. Its troops taking some casualties, but also taking territory on several fronts. Catching Russian forces off guard, even surprising some Ukrainians. This footage was filmed by Ukrainian forces. We can't document the battles ourselves. For now, journalists have been banned from the front lines. Kyiv determined to win the information war. And images of victory from the eastern city of Kupiansk. This was a key logistics hub for President Putin's men. In some areas, Russia's front line has collapsed. And liberation has come. Everything is okay, troops tell locals in the town of Balotlia. For 6 months we prayed you would come, she says. Natalia, too, endured months under occupation by the Russians, who she calls fascists. She and her husband Volodymyr were freed by the counter-offensive, but still show signs of their trauma.
When you saw the Ukrainian soldiers, when you realised they had come to free you, what was that moment like? What were your feelings?
We thought we would never see them. And then our boys came. And they were so handsome. So beautiful. Especially compared to the fascists. I didn't know what to do with them, if I should hug them or hold their hands. I touched them and I was very happy.
Ukrainian social media has been flooded with patriotic videos. The national anthem, now a battle hymn for troops who believe that momentum is swinging their way. But the Russians still hold around a fifth of Ukraine, including the city of Kherson. This was the resistance on the streets back in March. It was the first major Ukrainian city to fall after the invasion. We managed to reach a woman still living there who says the Russians are starting to lie low. For her protection, we aren't naming her, and her words are spoken by a BBC producer.
Over the past 2 or 3 days, the military seem to have quietened down a bit. They are less visible in cafes and restaurants. If street fighting starts, it will be very dangerous. I want to see our army here and thank them. I want to see their victory.
Scenes like this are cathartic for Ukraine and reassuring for its Western backers. No one imagines a swift end to the war. But the Ukrainians have now shown they can beat the Russians in battle, not just outmaneuver them. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Central Ukraine.
Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making the news today. Hundreds of people gathered outside the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police to protest against the shooting dead of a 24-year-old black man in South London on Monday. Chris Cabot was killed by a police officer following a car chase. His family are demanding the officer involved be immediately suspended after the police watchdog declared a murder investigation. The Met Police says the officer is not on operational duties and the force is cooperating fully with the police watchdog. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said that Pakistan needs massive financial support following devastating floods that have marooned vast parts of the country. On the second day of his visit to Pakistan, he described the situation as unimaginable. More than 1,400 people have died and millions have been forced to flee their homes. And UK scientists have established how air pollution can lead to cancer, a discovery that they say will transform our understanding of how tumours develop. The findings presented to the European Society for Medical Oncology could lead to drugs that block the disease. Let's return now to our main story, and the official proclamation of Charles as King took place not just in London today, but also in Ottawa in Canada, where he replaces the Queen as head of state. Queen Elizabeth made no fewer than 22 state visits there during her reign, more than to any other country. Our chief international correspondent Lyse Doucet reports now on how Canadians are remembering the Queen.
This morning in Ottawa, bearskin hats and a bugle, a solemn ceremony to confirm a king.
His Royal Highness Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign, Charles III.
A new head of state, Canada, one of 14 Commonwealth countries, former colonies, which still keep the crown.
Thank you again for your welcome. It is very good to be home.
For 7 decades, she drew the crowds here, old and new generations gathering to greet her, displaying affection for her and for what she loved. From corgi fan clubs in the capital, Ottawa, to fast horses at the Calgary Stampede in the west, Prince Philip enjoying himself too, always at her side, embracing Canadian culture, including its national sport.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. She's really touched the spirit of what being a Canadian is all about.
But often, the Queen was on thin ice.
The separatist extremists were making their promised demonstration.
Sometimes the people who showed up came to protest. This was the scene in the mainly French-speaking province of Quebec in 1964, when separatist sentiment was at its highest, anger over English domination. The Queen knew it, never showed it, steering a middle course.
Ottawa is a small capital.
From her very first visit as Queen in 1957, she always spoke both of Canada's official languages.
Pray be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Better than even some of Canada's politicians. Another difficult legacy of a darker imperial past.
The Indians were so delighted to meet the Great White Queen.
For Canada's Indigenous community, the monarchy also symbolises dispossession, discrimination, horrific abuses Canada's leaders are still confronting. This morning's ceremony to welcome the King sends another signal. The monarch's representative, Governor-General Mary Simon, is the first Indigenous person to hold this role. Other change could be coming. Recent polls show only a small minority of Canadians feel the monarchy still matters in their lives. But for now, it's still a constant. Lyse Doucet, BBC News, Ottawa.
Here, football grounds and racecourses around the country stayed empty this afternoon after their governing bodies decided to postpone events to mark the death of Queen Elizabeth. But after the government signalled that individual sporting organisations should make their own decisions, some sport is going ahead. Our sports correspondent Jo Wilson reports.
No one at the Oval needed to be told. As the cricketers of England and South Africa readied themselves, there was a hush in the grandstands long before the announcer officially declared a minute of silence would begin. And then came the reflection. And then came God Save the King. This was truly a unique sporting atmosphere, but England's captain was sure that playing on was the right thing to do.
Sad couple of days for not only us but the whole nation and the world as well. So, I mean, it's great to be stood here knowing that we're going to be out and playing this game, not just for us but almost in memory of the Queen.
Soon England were bowling and succeeding. Ollie Robinson took 5 wickets as South Africa were dismissed for just 118. England's women play this evening too. Rugby in both codes in England also chose to play, with respectful recognition. But football authorities across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland decided that matches should not take place this weekend. Horse racing, Queen Elizabeth's great passion, also paused to resume with a sense of thanks tomorrow, when the Great North Run, with some 60,000 entrants raising millions for charity, will also take place as planned.
Our mission is to organise the event in such a way that it pays true respect to the Queen's life and also allows people to express their own feelings and their own tribute to our great Queen.
Queen Elizabeth marked and elevated some of the proudest sporting moments. As the winners changed, she was constant. And as her involvement in horse racing displayed, sport was her source of joy, as it is for so many. Jo Wilson, BBC News.
Let's go back now to Buckingham Palace, where we can speak to our home editor, Mark Easton. And Mark, we saw today both formality and informality on display.
We did indeed, Rita, and you will know that there is a vast sort of media city, village that has grown up outside Buckingham Palace. The world is watching. And what the world saw today was the formal handover of power in the United Kingdom, dressed in breeches and braid and wearing a most surprising hat. The language may have been archaic, the ceremony may have been mystifying to many, but King Charles, like his mother before him, knows that custom and convention can drape potentially destabilising processes like this with timeless and reassuring continuity. I think actually that formula of the ancient and modern is going to define the reign of King Charles III. And that's what the world's media saw today, the formality of those royal proclamations and audiences, and then the informality of the walkabouts. Indeed, a short time ago, the King and Camilla, the Queen Consort, left the palace and conducted a walkabout in the Mall and at the entrance to Clarence House. And there you have in one day the tradition and you have modernity side by side.
And are we seeing there, Mark, the King trying to judge and respond to the mood of the nation?
We are, and this is a difficult time for Britain. We have two new leaders, a monarch and a Prime Minister, who have less than a week's experience of those jobs between them. And I think that it is interesting that it has been decided that the tour that Chris Mason mentioned earlier, with the King and the Queen visiting the capitals around the United Kingdom in the company of the new Prime Minister as well, will be an opportunity to reassure the country that although they are newbies, although that they are new to the jobs, they are up to it, and that the country is safe in their hands.
Mark, many thanks. Our home editor Mark Easton there. Time for a look at the weather now. Let's join Ben Rich. Ben.
Hello Rita, thank you. Good evening. After a week of frequent heavy showers, today has brought fewer showers, more in the way of dry weather and some spells of sunshine. There have still been some showers around, the speckled clouds bringing some showers across some central and eastern parts of England. Out towards the west, we've got more bands of cloud waiting in the wings. They will start to bring rain for some of us during tomorrow. But for the time being, we find ourselves in a window of mainly fine weather. Any showers in eastern parts of England will tend to fade through the night. Some mist and fog patches will start to develop. Temperatures typically 8 to 13 degrees. May get a little colder than that, though, across some parts of eastern Scotland. Tomorrow starts on a fine note for many. Any early fog should tend to clear. And then we are going to see some spells of sunshine. Just a small chance for a shower tomorrow across some eastern parts of England. Behind me, though, cloud and rain. Heavy rain at that, starting to push its way in towards Northern Ireland. But a southerly breeze making it feel warm tomorrow. 21 degrees on the coast of northeast Scotland. 23 or 24 across some southeastern parts of England. Northern Ireland will end tomorrow with some heavy thundery rain. That will then drift its way northeastwards overnight tomorrow into the early hours of Monday across Scotland. A band of rain developing across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales. That will tend to sit in place as we go through the day on Monday. More heavy thundery downpours perhaps across central and eastern parts of Scotland for a time. But this band of cloud and rain, something of a dividing line on Monday. To the north of it, cool, fresh conditions. To the south of it, actually some real warmth, up to around 26 degrees in the capital on Monday afternoon. But that warmth, quite short-lived. It'll turn cooler through the week ahead, and probably, for many of us, a bit drier as well. That's all from me for now. Rita.
Ben, many thanks. And that is all from us for now. We are back with the late news at 10:15 tonight. But for now, bye-bye.